We're now live.
Thank you, Georgina. Well, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Eastern Planning Committee. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Rivers and I have the pleasure of chairing this committee this evening. I encourage you all to keep your statements brief. And of course, they'll always be to the point. I'm absolutely sure of that. As you know, we will be timing speeches this evening and an alarm will sound when you've been speaking for 4 minutes. So moving to the agenda, item 1 on the agenda. Georgina, Catherine, do we have any apologies or substitutions this evening? I think we do.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Christine Baker, substituted by Councillor Paul Follows. Apologies have also been received from Councillor John Gray.
Excellent. Item 2, committee, would you confirm the minutes of the meetings held on, the meeting held on the 8th of December last year? These have been published on the council website. Are you in agreement?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Georgina, do we have any declarations?
Yes, Chairman. A declaration has been received from Councillor Ellis in relation to WA 2021-0023 because she's a trustee of Rowney's Community Centre in Cranley.
Lovely, thank you. And Councillor Ellis, I understand that's a non-pecuniary interest.
Yes, thank you.
So you'll take part as normal, as you so wish. That's good.
Thank you.
Item 4, questions by members of the public. Georgina, I beg your pardon.
None received, Chairman.
Sorry, can I record a non-pecuniary interest in items A2 and A3, as I'm a member of Godalming Town Council, and on A2 particularly that this was called, I called this in at the request of Godalming Town Council's Environment and Planning Committee. I'll send that in writing to Kim. Thank you, Chair.
In which case, so am I, in that case, as being on Godalming Town Council Environment and Planning Committee. Sorry to add that in at the last moment.
I just want to actually say that I'm not going to declare an interest, and the reason for that is that I do not take part in discussions or decisions at the town council for that reason, so as not to prejudice my position here.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want anyone to think it was odd as a member of the town council I hadn't declared an interest.
No, very good point, and I absolutely confirm that that's said at every meeting of Godalming Town Council Planning. Councillor Hegan.
I do have to declare a non-pecuniary interest for the same reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Hegan. Right, okay, so Georgina, sorry to come back to item 4, questions by members of the public. I think you said there were not any, is that correct?
Yes, sorry, Chairman, yes.
Thank you. And item 5, questions by members. Any questions?
None received.
Thank you. Item 6, to see if there are any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since our last meeting. Are there any? Please, Zach, yes, please.
No changes to national government policy, but just a couple of things I just wanted to bring to your attention in case they're of relevance tonight. So today we received, yesterday we received the appeal decision on the Lockwood Road appeal at Old Fold, and I'm sure many of you will be aware of that. Very disappointing decision. The inspector put great weight on the fact that he didn't agree with our 5-year land supply statement and suggested that we had, in his opinion, 4.01 years supply. What I would say is that we haven't had a chance to go through that in any great detail. It is one appeal decision. We will be going through it forensically line by line to see where we agree or disagree with the inspector. So I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that the 5-year position is, as the inspector has said, our published 5-year land supply position statement in November gave 5.2 years. Obviously, the inspector's decision is a material consideration in planning applications going forward, and will oft be quoted, I'm sure, by developers and agents. But we're not going to rush into this. We want to look very, very carefully at the decision, see where the inspector is coming from in terms of certain of the sites in our 5-year land supply statement. and then decide from there. But just wants to make that clear. Whether or not that's of any specific relevance to applications tonight, probably not of significant material consideration. Two other very brief things. In November's Eastern Committee meeting, you may remember that in the update, I mentioned the Environment Act had been taken through as the Environment Bill, and it had been given royal assent. We talked about biodiversity. That includes a 10% requirement for biodiversity net gain. I just wanted to make it clear to members following that whilst we're pushing for 10% minimum biodiversity net gain on new developments, the actual planning acts need to be updated before that becomes a legal requirement for 10% biodiversity net gain. And in fact, I saw an interesting, albeit very disappointing appeal decision recently, where an inspector made that point that he acknowledged the Environment Bill and the 10% in there, but made it clear that he couldn't give that planning weight because it's not part of it needs to be enacted through planning legislation, and accepted that 1% biodiversity net gain was sufficient to meet policy. I mean, that's disappointing in itself. It wasn't in this area. But I do need to make that point clear. And then thirdly, just to say that we should be making the Bramley neighbourhood plan very shortly, later this week, which is really good news, but I don't believe it affects any of the appeals tonight. But I will email each and every one of you and the town and parish clerks as soon as that decision has been formally made. It just needs my checking through and signing. Thank you, Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Cossey, yes, please.
I just want to be 100% clear here. I mean, clearly it is disappointing to the council that is what the inspector has said, and I equally understand that officers will want to look at that in some detail. But what I think I want to understand as a member of the planning committee, and I think you've partly at least given us the answer, is I think we're all aware that if that becomes the established position, then the tilted balance kicks in, which I think is a huge worry for all of us. And this is not the time to debate how that has happened and what the implications are. But I do want to understand as a member of this committee whether that tilted balance as of now, and I know you've said, and I accept that there aren't particularly large and significant applications in terms of number of houses and such before us, but when does that kick in? I mean, clearly we're going to get further advice on this when you've looked at it, but I want, as I'm sure other members do, to do my job properly as a member of the planning committee. And if that is the established position by that inspector at the moment, should I be taking account of that as of now when I look at these applications in terms of tilted balance?
Zach, would you please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, through you. I mean, it's a very valid question. The council's current published position statement is as of November 2021 that we have 5.2 years housing supply. The inspector's decision, as I mentioned, could be a material consideration, but we've only received the decision at 5 p.m. last night from the inspectorate, and we need to go through it. I mean, we're in the position at the moment. I'm not saying we will legally challenge it, but we're in the time frame now whereby the council could, if it chose to, mount a legal challenge against that appeal decision. As I say, I'm not in a position to say whether we would or not, because we haven't gone through it in that forensic detail. What I would say is it is an appeal decision. It is a recent appeal decision that covers the matter of 5-year land supply, and members will want to give it an element of weight in their considerations. But it's not a new position statement. The inspector doesn't have the powers to impose the 5-year land supply on us. It's their view, and obviously we can't just ignore that. But equally, it is a view. We will be assessing that. Whether or not that means we publish a revised position statement over the next few months, looking at the evidence further and establishing that, then that could change things. Obviously, the ironic thing is that revised position statement, were we to do one, would now include the 99 homes at Alford Road, because that was a full application, and so that would go towards the housing land supply. So I think my answer is that our current stated position is that the tilted balance isn't engaged, but you may want to be cognizant and take into account the inspector's decision as a material consideration and give it the weight that you as the decision maker feel is appropriate. Unfortunately, I wish I was in a position where we'd gone through it and I was able to give you more comfort about the weight that I would give it, but we're just not in that position. So, but it's something to bear in mind in your deliberations around tilted balance arguments, but it's not something that I'm saying that you are duty bound to follow the inspector's conclusions in respect to the 5-year supply. Sorry, I heard you. No, hopefully that was clear enough.
I think there are lots of questions, but this is not.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reid, you have a
Thank you. I
question
agree
too.
with you. It's not the time and place. And I believe that Mr. Elwood, our head of planning, will be emailing us all on this subject and we'll have further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I'm sure you will, Zach.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
I look forward to it. Anything to fill up my inbox is always, from you, is always welcome. Members, we move on then to our applications tonight. Item 8.1, which is A1 WA 2021-0023, Exeter House, Rowland Road, Cranley. The proposal is change of use from office use class B1A to 5 dwellings use class C, with erection of extension, revision of a previous application as amended by plans received in September and November last year. And luckily, Kate Edwards is going to take us through it, I believe. Over to you, Kate.
Yes, that's right, Chair. Thank you very much. And my colleagues in the chamber have very kindly volunteered to share the presentation with you. So I'll just wait for that to come online and then I'll talk you through it. Thank you.
If there's a problem, I can try to share my screen. Would you like me to do that?
I think we're all right. It was Citrix logged me out.
Okay.
Just go down.
Thank you very much for that, Kimberly and James. So yes, the application is for change of use of an existing office building into 5 dwellings with the erection of a relatively small extension. And it's of note that the application, or rather the property, already benefits from a prior approval for conversion from office to 4 flats. This is an application which was deferred in September pending the receipt of further details. So we can see here the site plan with the site outlined in red. To the north is Victoria Road, which contains a number of residential dwellings, and to the south is the back of properties, many of which have accesses from the high street. There's also a property immediately adjacent to Exeter House, which you may just see on the plan there is indicated as York House. I have, following discussions and representations today, been advised that that property has recently been converted to residential use, although there is no record that I can see of that use being lawful. So in planning terms, the lawful use of that property is as an office. And I now have some photos I can show you of the site. And the members who attended the site visit will recall the matters that we looked at on site. So here we can see what I'd consider the main front elevation of the property, which is the western elevation facing towards Rowland Road, with, as you can see, a number of vehicles already in the current situation utilising the forecourt for parking. And here is a view to the side of the property, to the northern side, just of the existing windows, where you can see the windows there are currently obscure glazed. This is the side of the building which faces towards the dwellings on Victoria Road. And so here we can see the proposed floor plan. The physical changes that are being made to the exterior, the most significant of which are the construction of a single-storey extension, which you can see there on the ground floor plan, just to the left of the building. There would be a small ground floor extension, and to the opposite side of the building, a bin store would be provided. The bin store and details of it were one of the matters on which the previous deferral was based. The applicant has subsequently provided this plan, which confirms that they'd be able to provide 2 bins as per the requirement for each flat. So each flat would have its own individual bin, or bins rather, albeit within a communal store. And the applicants also stated that there would be a shelf above the main bins for the smaller food waste bins and so on. So you can see there would be 2 units provided on the ground floor, and on the ground floor 2 access doors would be created in what is the southern elevation, so effectively near to the bin store there would be 2 access doors provided, one solely for the ground floor flat and the other for the flats above. And then as you move up the building on the first floor, further units would be provided. Of note on this plan for the first floor is that apologies, thank you. On this plan for the first floor, you can see that to the rear left corner, which is within the western facing elevation, you can see that dwelling would have a bedroom in that location. This is one of the key differences from the previous application on the site, which was most recently refused. In relation to that application, this space was proposed as a kitchen, dining, sitting space in the main living space for that unit. The window to this room, in my view, should be obscure glazed to prevent overlooking to Victoria Road properties, given the proximity. And as a main living space, that wasn't acceptable with the previous proposal. However, as it's now a bedroom, on balance, in my view, that wouldn't represent a reason for refusal. And then finally, moving to the second floor plan, you can see here again that there would be a further unit provided within the roof space. And now looking at the elevation plans, the northern elevation that you can see there to the left-hand side is the elevation facing Victoria Road, the one shown within the photos we looked at. And within this elevation, this is obviously the side of the building where this fairly small single-storey extension would be built, and the other key change to this elevation would be the insertion of 2 roof lights within the roof space. The western elevation now, to the right-hand side, you can see the changes proposed. There would be a change to the existing dormer window within the roof space, and this would be changed to provide full-length openable doors. And as you can also see there from the roof profile of the northern elevation, this would provide a walkout balcony. Equally, at first floor level, you can at first floor level to the western elevation, you can see there what appears to be a balcony. Whilst this isn't shown on the northern and southern elevations, as we would expect, unfortunately, it is shown on the floor plan, the first floor plan, for that space as having a walkout balcony, which matches the elevation. So the planning assessment which I've done is for including a walkout balcony at that level, and my assessment concludes that that is acceptable in privacy terms, given the separation distance and the oblique angle to properties on Victoria Road. I believe there would be 21 metres to those properties, which according to our guidance and my view would be satisfactory to prevent any adverse overlooking issues. And then this is a southern elevation to the side of the building where the bin store would be. And an eastern elevation finally, which would be facing towards Onslow Mews. And so here we can see a site plan. At the time the application was previously before committee, there was still an ongoing discussion with regards to the parking, and it was previously recommended that this matter was reserved by condition, but committee felt it would be useful to and important to quantify the number of spaces and the layout of the spaces prior to a decision being made, particularly given the tight nature of the site and the representations we've received. So this plan just clarifies how the spaces would be provided. There would be 4 spaces to provide the there would be 4 spaces to serve the 5 flats. So one of the flats wouldn't have a space, but as I've outlined in the report, I considered that to be acceptable given the very central location and the smaller size of the units. So here you can see 3 spaces which would be parallel to the adjacent building, which the applicant has advised are existing spaces which have been in use for a number of years and which I have seen vehicles parked within when we've been on site, and I believe we saw when we did our committee site visit last year. There'd also be 1 parking space located next to the northern elevation, next to the proposed extension to serve that specific unit. And the applicants also indicated a turning area adjacent to the building, which would be hatched and kept free of obstruction. And they've also provided, which was one of the other matters on which the deferral was based, they've also provided details of the electric vehicle charging points, confirming that there would be 1 charging point provided to serve each of the spaces. And the Highway Authority have confirmed that the details of the charging points are acceptable. And also I will note that the report which you have seen lists a number of heritage assets in the vicinity of the site, including a number of listed buildings and the conservation area. And just to confirm that there would be no harm to the significance of those assets in accordance with the tests in section 66 and within the MPPF. In terms of updates for the committee, you will have noted that we haven't, that there hasn't been an update sheet for this application, but I just wanted to update you verbally following the receipt of a member query in relation to the matter. In relation to condition 8, as recommended, which is for obscure glazing to windows, I propose to insert into that condition a reference to not just windows, but to windows and roof lights, just to avoid any potential for ambiguity or challenge in relation to whether or not the roof lights which are new, which are proposed to the northern elevation or obscure glazed. So I'm proposing to add in that wording to refer to roof lights. And that is everything really by way of updates. And to confirm the recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now I believe we have a public speaker, Mr. Hyam, Bob Hyam. Are you with us? Oh,
I think, can you hear me now?
yes, I can. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Hyam, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the west-facing elevation on the plans shown on page 23 of the report. Unfortunately, I don't have access to your PowerPoint slides. Your officer's report states that the plans show 2 walkout balconies to the western elevation, and Kate was just taking you through those on the first and the second floor. This is the first time that the officers have acknowledged that the plans actually do show walkout balconies. In previous reports, officers have been adamant that these were 2 Juliet balconies. The report also states that the applicant maintains that walkout balconies are not proposed. However, as you will appreciate, there's been ample opportunities for the applicant to remove them from any one of the numerous plans submitted over the years, but they've chosen not to. In addition, your officer's report appears only to consider Unit 5's balcony on the second floor. Which is odd. The report states the site description section of further office buildings sited to the south of Exeter House. This is not an office building, as you've heard, as York House is now a residential building. I can't go into the legality, except the resident of York House actually submitted an objection to the proposal, and in that objection he states that he's paying council tax. So presumably if he's paying council tax, it is a residential property. The report says that the properties to the west are sufficiently distanced from that building that overlooking would not be significant. Clearly, if York House is a residential property, this is incorrect. It's less than 5 metres horizontally away from the second floor balcony. Anyone standing on that balcony would have a direct line of sight through a window into York House's lounge. So it's a fairly key point, this. The second walkout balcony is on the first floor, if you remember from the drawings. And though this is labelled the western elevation, it's actually northwest, so that anyone walking out onto that balcony could turn to their right and have an immediate and direct view into the properties on Victoria Road. The most northerly point of that balcony is less than a metre away from the first floor windows on the northern elevation. And a refusal due to overlooking for this northern elevation was the single refusal reason for a previous application, hence the maintenance of the obscured glazing. That glazing is only 16.5 metres away from the properties on Victoria Road. If you look at the plans, and the report says 20.5, but if the windows are 16.5, that balcony is less than a metre away from the windows. So previously you have refused the application on the basis of overlooking. That particular balcony is no more than a metre away from the windows. So my point is, well, if you refused previously on overlooking, surely you should refuse again, because if someone not standing on that balcony is in the same position. I think I'm 5 seconds short, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond. That's very good. Members, do we have any comments on this? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. The planning officer comprehensively answered the questions that I raised by email relating to this application. I'm very grateful to Kate for her time and attention. However, I do retain significant concerns regarding the detrimental impact on the amenity of residents living in the area, particularly those in Victoria Road who would suffer from disturbance, and more so in the evenings and weekends, which is probably more inconvenient to them than if the building was retained as office, which would be closed. Victoria Road has very limited residents-only parking facilities, and due to the very limited provision of on-site parking at the site in question, I can only see an increasing problem for the operation of the Rowley's Centre for the Community, which is also in Victoria Road, where their car park is increasingly full of unauthorised vehicles, many of which are owned by local residents, to the extent that disabled members of Rowley's have not been able to use facilities. There is no on-street parking in the area, and although a couple of extra parking spaces have been squeezed in on the site, this will make it even more difficult for, as I thought at the time, employees of York House, but it would now appear that that's residential. And I do remember applications in the past to convert this building that were refused. And also for the high street outlets that have legitimate access through this car park to the rear of their properties for deliveries, there is no opportunity for them to, or very little opportunity for them to have deliveries to the front of their buildings. I was, and it has been referred to, very grateful to the officers for arranging a site visit several months ago now, during which a considerable number of concerns were raised that the officers do believe have been properly addressed to their satisfaction. However, I have reservations about the appropriateness of this application and retain a number of concerns, including the alterations to the existing building with particular regard to the balconies, and the need for quite a lot of obscured glazing to counteract overlooking, the impact on neighbours' residential amenity, very limited parking and turning facilities on site, increased difficulties of access for the deliveries to the rear of the high street units through the site, access for service and emergency vehicles, storage of waste bins on site, which, I'm sorry, does not appear to me to have been adequately explained. And remembering our site visit, I'm not sure that it's actually possible in practice without huge inconvenience to residents and pedestrians, many of whom are elderly and many of others are school children going to schools in the area. With the bins being left for roadside delivery, which will often stay on the pavements, which is narrow and not very stable. The proposals are recommended for agreement, and I will listen very carefully to the observations of my fellow members. But at this time, I feel that there is a cumulative number of what I see as far too many real problems, and that should this application be granted, there would be significant detrimental impact on local residents and businesses and the wider community. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to thank Kate today for speaking with me on this application as well, and clarifying the point about the York House. I do share some of the reservations of my fellow ward member, Councillor Ellis, as well. I do think the actual residential amenity of people living in this property is not what I would hope to see within Cranley, I'm afraid. But obviously it has had an application agreed for 4 properties previously, 4 flats. But when I look back at the design and access statement for those 4 properties, the properties on the ground floor did have little gardens, and it was a more visually appealing and probably a nicer place to live. Now outside, I can only see just hatched areas, which are going to be a turning circle, basically. I am also concerned about what is the service area within the middle, that hatched area. I am aware that within the deeds for a neighbouring property there, Tyler's Court, that the whole of the area that is proposed to be the hatched area, and also the area where the 3 parking spaces are going to be, as you enter the property on the right hand side, where the EV charging points are going to be, is referred to as a service area. There aren't any parking spaces, and there is a clear footpath that is designated on the deeds, which must be kept clear at all times. And I don't think the condition to achieve electrical vehicle parking points in that place is actually going to be achievable. I am aware that this goes outside of, the access, and that may be outside of our planning, but also we have to have a condition that will stand a test. And at the moment, I cannot, from looking at the title deeds of the adjoining property, which can be made available to other members as well, I do think that there is an issue with getting the charging points in that area and providing ample space for cars to park there as well. So all I can see is continued mayhem in this area for people living here. And also another thing about the access is the Environment Agency did actually state that it was up to Waverley Borough Council to assure there will be safe access and egress to the site. I can't see within the application how that's been achieved. I can't see the Environment Agency or our response to that access and egress and safe access and egress. And also, I would like to know how we view that has been achieved, because obviously there is, this is a small block of flats, and I want to be clear in my mind that safety has been considered. I share Councillor Ellis's view about the bins. There was something that we brought up and I know it's simple, we think, oh, well, it might be a simple thing, but we did actually look at that area and we asked for whether it could be realistically achieved that all the bins could be put down that side passage and easily extracted by residents living here. And with the addition of another flat, there's another bin or bins. And I'm still not convinced that I understand how that is going to be achieved. I'm also a bit disconcerted about the plans and the fact that one plan shows, that there's an outside walkout balcony and another plan doesn't. And I think that disparity has been particularly unhelpful for people living in Victoria Road. And I don't think that has been probably wasn't addressed in enough time. And I think, that really we should have been looking for just a Juliet balcony at the very least on that first floor level, and not a walkout balcony, which then does actually overlook into Victoria Road. I am pleased that the conditions being changed so that the roof lights are going to be obscure. But again, it does for me then bring into some question about the residential amenity for people living in that top flat as well. So all in all, I'd like to hear what obviously the rest of the members have to say, but at this moment in time, I have got some queries which I'd like answered, but also I'm really not sure that I am in support of officer's recommendation at this stage, but I would like to hear obviously what my fellow members have to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Townsend. Now, do you want Kate to attempt to address that issue on security access, or shall we let Councillor Reid make her point? Leave it to me then. Kate, would you be able to address Councillor Townsend's point, please?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the safe access in times of access and egress in times of flood, effectively this would be for residents to walk down what is the private land and the access road, which, as we saw when we were on site, is, you know, it's obviously not an area that has a high footfall. It's simply adjacent to parking spaces. So it's to walk down that route. And then I note that the flood risk assessment identifies that route as being a low hazard route. And on that basis, we did consider that safe access and egress was provided. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Several points I want to make. I reiterate my concerns in the initial report with the confusion of Juliet balconies and walkout balconies. I mean, this is, you know, it gets the nub of it. So that's one of my concerns, that we didn't have the correct information and there were contradictions. I also agree with Councillor Townsend about the obscure glazing, but my point would be, what quality of life is there in a cell basically with obscure windows? I'll leave that for other people to think about. The access is not only for the Exeter House, it is also for people dropping off large items at Oxfam. That's the only access they have. And also for a food outlet, all of whom have bins themselves, and you know, they need emergency access too. Now I want to come on to we did ask last time, I remember, for the report on EV charging. Now, if you have a look at that path, which, and I must thank very much to Kate Edwards, very kindly spending a lot of time with us at the site visit. We had a look at that path. It is a pretty poor path, to say the least. There are going to be EV charges, but we also see that there's a sort of barrier to stop the EV charging points being knocked by cars turning from the chevroned area. But the actual path itself is only going to be 30 millimeters wide. Now that is the width, pretty well, of a 12-inch ruler for all of us in imperial measures. I beg your pardon? 300, I do mean, yes, thank you. Yeah, it's very slim. But I noticed that, you know, this is, you know, anyone getting in and out of a car would have to be, you know, very, very slim, I should think. And also that there will be a blockage by all the EV charging cables. We have an electric car and I understand that sort of thing. So the obscure windows not only offend me, and I do feel sorry for people who, if this is approved, would have to live behind those windows. The outlook won't be that nice for them. So it is quality of life, and that's what I've highlighted here. A few more notes, I think, from one of these pages. I do think that, you know, if it is approved, it should only be 4 dwellings, not because of just the parking, but all these obscure windows. I hope we can come to some solutions.
I'm happy if you want to come back, and I'll let some other members in.
Do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Goodridge, and then I have Councillor Coster.
Thank you, Chairman. A happy New Year. I'm just looking at the practicalities of the parking and the bins, and it's a question and a comment. The 4th parking space on the northern side, the one on its own, seems to be parked right up to the building, just about. And we should remember there's a front door in that elevation of that extension. And also the plan on page 23 shows 2 wheelie bins there as well, which seem to be in the parking space. As if I recall, there are 8 bins on the southern side, and therefore 2, still there would be the 2 bins parked in the parking space. So I'd like just clarification that not all the bins are going to be in one place, but there'll be two by the extension. If all the bins are in one place on the southern elevation, I wouldn't like to be living on the flat adjacent to the extension, because you've got an awful long way to take your rubbish. But in reality, what is going to happen, of course, is that parking space is going to be further encroaching into the hatched area, because nobody will want to drive their car within a foot or something of their front door. And also they seem to have a very narrow, when the car's parked, it's going to be a bit of a squeeze to get to the front door anyway. I won't allude to the balconies, just repeating what other people have said, but I do remember when we did the site visit last year, that we couldn't get to the side gate to have a look where these bins were going to be, because there were enormous commercial bins in the way, 3 or 4 of them from memory, used by people whose properties face the high street, I think. And again, being practical, I cannot see that those wheelie bins were going to magically disappear. They're going to be, in the way of the parking space, I suspect. Although, of course, for the residents to get in and out of most of the flats, they've got to get into that side gate. So some arrangements got to be made, but I'm just concerned on the practicalities of whether we're trying to squeeze one extra flat to the detriment of the other 4 and the area. But I've not made my mind up at the moment. But the principle, of course, is that there will be 4 flats here at least, and we've got to decide whether the bins and the parking are realistic, practical, and satisfactory or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cossar, and then I have Councillor Gale and a few others.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This one's newer to me than other members of the committee. I wasn't at the site visit because I couldn't attend the committee. I think it's probably any committee I missed, but there we are. So I've come to this fairly fresh, and having looked at the report, I identified from it the issues that the members have raised last time, and it seemed to me that they were pretty well dealt with by our officers. That doesn't mean that I don't share some of the concerns that have been expressed by colleagues about the cramped nature of this site and trying to squeeze something else on. And indeed, there is an application later on this agenda, which I think has similar things attached to it in my own area, but we'll leave that till we come to it. But the thing there's 2 issues that concern me, and that is that how do we, in planning terms, if we can, because I'm struggling with this, articulate that concern? Do we have proper and legitimate planning grounds to reject the application? I'm struggling, frankly, with that. But the other issue I did want to address, and I'm sorry if everyone else understands this, but I'm afraid from what I've heard, I don't understand it. Are we talking about a Juliet balcony, or are we talking about a walkout balcony? And I don't mind if different things were put on different reports and so on, and they were changed. What I am concerned about is we had a speaker who stated to us that this is a walkout balcony, and it would provide the opportunity for direct sight into a lounge at very close distance and so on. And that would be of significant concern to me. So before you may well want to take other speakers, that's your concern, Joe, but I certainly want to hear, before I make up my mind from our planning officers, just exactly what the position is. What sort of balconies are they, and what is the position in terms of impact on residential amenity? Thank you.
Chairman, Kate has her hand up, so.
Okay, all right. Kate, if you'd like to help us through the issues that Councillor Cossar has raised, or if you're not ready for that, I can call on a few other speakers first.
Yes, well, I would just say, in relation to the issues more broadly, we obviously have a duty in terms of consistency in decision making in relation to previous applications. The previous application on the site was refused, and in effect the only outstanding issue identified in relation to that application was in relation to the residential amenity of the future occupiers, because one of the units to the west and rear of the building would have a obscure glazing, which in itself is necessary to address the overlooking concerns in relation to Victoria Road of that part of the building. So I just sort of really state to members that that's one matter to bear in mind as the discussion progresses. In relation to the balconies proposed to the western elevation, I can confirm, following much comment and representation and so on, that it's my view that the balconies as shown are walkout balconies, so they're not Juliet balconies, and you know that's obviously a material consideration, but I would put to members to bear in mind in relation to that with privacy concerns in relation to balconies. Not that I consider that they are within such a distance of lawful residential dwellings, which would cause me a privacy concern. If there is a privacy concern specifically in relation to the balconies, I would just advise members to consider whether that matter could be addressed by a condition. In relation to privacy concerns in relation to balconies, we would often apply a condition requiring privacy screens, which would be obscure glazed panels, which would be put up to the side of the balconies to prevent flank views. So they're the sort of key points I just wanted to raise with you. Thank you.
Kate, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Zach Elwood to add a few points.
Yeah, it was just a really quick one on the points that my colleague Kate has just made, and she's quite right that we do, where we are concerned about overlooking from balconies, we can put a condition on. You know, I'm not disagreeing with the position, but the distance to the houses on Victoria Road is around 21 metres, which is a good distance. But obviously these are the back gardens to those premises, and whether or not there's actual overlooking, there might be a perception of being overlooked by the walkout balconies, and I'd be very comfortable that it would meet the tests as set out in the NPPF for us to require to add a condition requiring submission of a details of screening to those northern elevations of the northern side of the balconies to be submitted to and approved in writing by the council. We would normally ask for 1.7 metres high screens, and those normally be either frosted glass or dark glass or obscure glazing. But I think because we haven't got those details, it would be appropriate to ask for those details to be submitted prior to the first occupation of those dwellings. I do take on board some of the concerns that have been raised about quality of life. I would remind members that we do have a permission, a prior approval for 4 dwellings on this site, and that the previous application for 5 was only refused on the sole ground of overlooking, and we believe that that has been addressed, and the additional concerns about the walkout balcony could be addressed by condition. Finally, you know, I take Councillor Townsend's point about flooding, but flood risk zone 1 obviously is the lowest risk of flooding, and it's 1 in 1,000 year risk of flooding. And whilst, you know, the Environment Agency have almost unhelpfully said, oh, we have to be concerned about egress and access in the event of a flood, it's surprising to me that they've raised that in this instance, given that it is flood zone 1 in a 1 in 1,000 year, you know, situation of flooding, and perhaps that's raised a flag that perhaps wasn't necessary, but you know, but it is our call at the end of the day, not the Environment Agency. So I think there's been some very valid points. I do think on balance, that this should still be approved. And obviously, the one thing it will do is deliver 5 houses in a sustainable urban location that will count towards our housing need. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I've got 4 speakers, Councillor Gale, and then Councillor Follows, and then 2 others.
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Gale.
Thank you. I have issues with overlooking bin stores and parking. Overlooking, I take what Zach is saying about putting up screens, but from what I can see, the overlooking from the walkout balconies is towards what we now believe is York House is actually inhabited. So that's screens at the front of those balconies then. When we went on a site visit, we looked at the bin store and we identified that there's very little room towards the side. And we also queried whether the bins could be got in and out particularly well with the large wheelie bins that were already in that vicinity. Also, the bins would have to be left, and it's quite a number of bins with 5 units. They would all have to be left on the boundary of the property, which would possibly block access for vehicles entering. I can't agree with the officer's decision that 4 spaces for 5 units is adequate. As Councillor Ellis quite rightly said, there is no on-street parking in that area. They will end up at Rowley's, I would imagine. And even if you're on your own in a very small unit, you probably do need a vehicle in Cranley, because actually the public transport in Cranley is not good. We do know that people move down here and they live in Godalming and they move from London where they don't need a vehicle. When they get here, they suddenly discover that they're in the countryside and they do need a vehicle. So I think that would be another vehicle on site. So I can't see that 4 spaces is adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gale. I'd like Mr. Elwood just to comment on the York House position, please.
Yeah, just to repeat what my colleague Kate Edwards said in her presentation, is that there's no information or evidence to suggest that any permission or prior approval has been granted to York House to be used for residential purposes. If there are people living there, then that's as may be. But if it's not a lawful use, we can't fetter the development of another site on a non-lawful use. And I imagine we'll want to take this to my enforcement colleagues tomorrow to investigate. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Follows, and then Councillor Dinas, and then Councillor Sadler. So Councillor Follows, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going back to part of the planning history. I mean, the 4 units that have granted permission is done under a prior approval application. So it's specifically not looked at and considered the residential amenity as part of that. I think the points that have been made have been very clear regarding that amenity being impacted by the various aspects, the parking, the bins, the access, I can't sit here and say that the location is sustainable. I mean, I live in the centre of Godalming and I've got 2 London Line train stations near me with bus access about 5 times an hour. Cranley's not like that. And so I don't really feel that we can say I'm sure in planning terms it's classed as a sustainable location because it's in the middle of a town centre area. But I think we really should be applying all we know here, that Cranley is not particularly sustainable for public transport. And I imagine that the ward councillors who've highlighted where the parking will actually go, they are probably correct. And this is one of those few times where I would be sitting here arguing that they probably will need a car and probably will need the parking spaces that our standard for parking says they should have. So to be quite blunt, I would actually just be inclined to say, well, they can get 4 through prior notification application, let them build 4. This is one of those times where adding that extra unit potentially causes a number of issues. We can't stop them building 4, let them build 4. 5 is one too many in the area that we're talking about for all the reasons that have been outlined here. That's all from me, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dinas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the points I was going to raise have been covered by various people, so I'll try and not repeat and I'll be quick. Actually, the point that Paul Follows just made about 4 dwellings, that was my first point. 4 is, in my view, probably too many. 5 is overdevelopment. And if I had to describe it, this is trying to squeeze a pint in a half-pint glass. It's totally inappropriate. It was talked about emergency vehicles. Well, I, from my previous life, have taken an emergency vehicle down this road. So I think I can speak from experience. It is an awful little stretch. And if you try and turn around, you end up having to reverse into the main road, right? I've done that route many times. I've had to reverse. So it's a nightmare. Trying to turn around is not going to happen with bins and people leaving their vehicles. There is no way to police that, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare. I won't talk about the balcony too much, other than the fact that the privacy panels, I think we talked about 1.7 meters. So we're going to have a little balcony with a 1.7 enclosure around you, which is going to be awful. Talk about feeling you're in a prison cell. You know, that would just be awful. You know, if it was me, I wouldn't want that, because it's going to take any light away and make it really, really poor for the people. Zach, I totally understand what you say. This is about getting 5 additional houses. Well, actually, we've got 4. My view is, and despite how angry I am tonight anyway about the appeal that's been mentioned, to put this onto Cranley for the sake of 1 additional house, to make it for the future so poor, I'm sorry, I couldn't sign up for that. I have to be consistent, whether it's my own area or somebody else's. I just think this is overdevelopment and a step too far. So I will not be voting for it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sadler, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I can't actually get past these balconies issue. I would like to understand why the plans were accepted, because obviously they're incomplete. I've read plans all my life, and it's not clear that they're walkout balconies, and I just don't understand why there wasn't picked up by the planners. And also, I would say in the papers, it would be useful to have existing elevations to compare against the proposed ones. And that's just a general sort of comment.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, these things always seem to be a little closely run. 2 more speakers, right? Oh, well, okay. So Councillor Darcy then, please, and Councillor Wilson.
Thank you.
So Councillor Darcy first, please, and then Councillor Wilson.
It's just a quick thing, and I noticed that I think it's a condition, yes. Condition number 3, it says that, sorry, it must be a different, condition number 4. The development shall not be first occupied unless and until facilities for the secure covered parking of bicycles within the development site have been provided. Well, given all the other uses of that space, I can't imagine how on earth they're going to do that. So I have to say, I totally agree with Kevin, sorry, Councillor Denis, and this is unacceptable. It's completely overdeveloped. There's insufficient parking. There's absolutely no amenity space for the residents. The parking is ludicrous. You won't be able to get the electric vehicle things in because people will trip over the wires. There's nothing good to be said about this. So I'll definitely be voting against.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, and then because I'm really nice and it's the
I'm
first
going
meeting
to be
this year.
extremely quick, Chairman.
No, I was going to say that Councillor Townsend will come in for a last bit. So go for it, Councillor Wilson.
Right, 2 things. I understand that one of the premises is under the national standard, and the officer has accepted that it could be called a single person unit. Can we condition that? I don't think so, and I can't see there being a single person unit in the middle of Cranley personally. Now, the other thing is, when we deferred it to have a look at all the issues that we've raised now. And my feeling is that none of us are happy that our concerns have been dealt with. I too think that a 4-premise property takes away a lot of our concerns, because that is another car parking space that we don't have to have. It is also 2 bins that we don't have to have. So I really don't think, as my colleagues have said it's big enough. The area is not big enough for 5 people to live reasonably. And then that would resolve the 1-person flat issue as well, I would think. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And very tiddly time.
Just
then.
a point of clarification, which I'd be very appreciative if Kate could answer, because she mentioned about our reason for refusal previously was just on the residential amenity because of the obscure glazing, and that has now been changed. But was that the 4-bedroom, the 4 flat? Because I don't think we've refused this, we deferred it to come before us with answers to the previous questions. And I just would like clarification for you know, what weight that has, because I believe that refusal was, but please correct me, Kate, for the 4 flats previously. Thank you.
Kate or Zach?
Yes, thank you. Just to confirm, we have had a previous planning application which was for 5 units, which was refused with that sole refusal reason.
Right, okay, well, no more speakers, and I think we've given it a good, very good rattle. Just to state the obvious, members, as we are back in the chamber, as we move to a vote, I would like you to indicate whether you are in favour of this application by raising your hands, and Kim will do all the counting necessary. May I see by hand those in favour of this application?
Chairman, could we just,
Goodrich?
so that the application is clear, before we vote, are we going to suggest that there is screening on the whatever north side of the 1st floor balcony or not? Because we ought to agree on that, and then with that decide whether the application is acceptable or not. Would that not be wise? So the extra condition that our Chief Planning Officer suggested.
Are you proposing that, Councillor Goodrich, or?
Yeah, well, I think it would be a reasonable
as an amendment.
Yes, it's not all round, because I think somebody suggested it was all round. It's just on the northern side.
Okay, okay. So, Councillor Goodrich, would
I'm
you
happy
just
to propose it.
Would you propose that? Just be a bit clear for me what you're proposing.
A condition be added to put a screen, details of which to be approved by officers, on the northern side of the 1st floor balcony.
Thank you for that, Councillor Goodrich.
Sorry, is it just the one, or there are 2? Both, possibly.
Councillor Goodrich.
Do you want it on the 1st and the 2nd floor? If so, I can agree that too. But I understood from
I think the concerns around Victoria Road premises and both would have a north facing.
Happy to do it on 1st and 2nd floor balconies.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goodrich, for that amendment. I'm happy. Councillor Ellis?
Sorry, could we just confirm that condition 8, the amendment that was suggested, that Kate would accept?
Yeah. Kate, would you do that, please?
Yes, I could confirm that, adding in a reference to reflight to condition 8.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a proposal from Councillor Goodrich that you just heard as an amendment, and the change that Kate has mentioned earlier. May I see those in favour?
Chairman, could we have a seconder?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Costa. Thank you for helping me through that. So we have a proposer and a seconder. May I see those in favour of this new motion?
Yeah, we're voting for the amended, for the extra condition.
The extra condition. And the amended condition number on 8. Yes, that's what. Okay, I hope we're all clear on that. May I see by show of hands then those in favour of that? And those against?
Abstention. Thank you, Chairman. So the vote for the extra condition plus the amended condition 8 is 11 for, 1 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Excellent. So that's carried. Thank you, members. So moving then on to our next application.
No, Chairman, we have to vote. We now have to vote on the application, Chairman.
I beg your pardon, members. I am sorry. I humbly apologise. That seems to be the thing to do these days. So,
permission be granted.
All right. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. This is a new year already. So the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 9 with the change to 8 and the extra condition that we've just spoken about, informatives 1 to 6. May I see those in favour of that, please? And those against?
Okay, Chairman, thank you.
No, any others? No. Okay, sorry.
No, if they abstain, they've done it twice,
Yeah.
Chairman.
Okay.
So the vote for the application is 3 for, 10 against and no abstentions. So the application fails.
Can I just check? I thought it might be 11, but did you catch Councillor Ellis's?
There's 13
13
members.
are there?
13 others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enough.
10.
Oh.
14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Well, 15.
Well,
Sorry,
Councillor Wilson is
a member.
Oh, sorry, 14.
for an electric voting system. Are you happy with
14.
14, I apologise.
That's
So
okay.
it's 11.
that? Right. Excellent. So,
So the vote on the amendment was wrong as well.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Could I just clarify the amendment? Just clarify it. So how many for on the amendment? 12. Right, that's fine. That's agreed the numbers now. Thank you.
perfect. Thank you. So, okay. I'm going to call on Mr. Elwood just to make a comment for our benefit, please, before I then ask for a recommendation.
Obviously, I don't want to lead members, but I thought it might be helpful to, to express what I've heard from the discussion. There are a number of issues around parking, inadequate parking. There was comments about absence of private amenity space or usable private amenity space. There were concerns about position of electric charging point. There were concerns about being cramped in terms of having to fit in a number of parking spaces and the bin stores. And you could assess from that it's, I think the word was trying to fit a quart into a pint pot, so what it's leading me to is that all of these things together are suggesting that whilst 4 has already, we have to acknowledge that 4 has already been approved through prior approval, that 5 is a step too far and suggests that in this site of constrained size, with all the things that are needed in terms of amenity space, living accommodation, so you've got living accommodation with obscure glazed windows and concerns about that, it's pointing towards this potentially being an overdevelopment of this site as evidenced by, and I would suggest that that would be a stronger position to defend at an appeal than individually trying to pick off, the issues around parking, the bin store, etc. I think what it's saying is that taken as a whole, this doesn't meet our policy requirements because it fails in several areas, and I think that's where I would come from. But Kat's going to make a comment, and it may be about the previous refusal reason, and I do acknowledge that the previous application was only refused on overlooking. That was a delegated decision. I think it was a delegated decision, and I think members are entitled to take a fresh look at this application. So it was, yeah, but yeah.
Okay, all right. Councillor Dinas, are you making a recommendation?
No, I'm going to just add to that commentary that Zach gave, because I think it's useful for that overriding issues. It was mentioned, I think it was Councillor Wilson, about one premises being under national standards, and I think that's been part of our thought process. And the cycle store, I know we talked about parking bins and everything else, but I think as we're showing that overview, we should just include that in our process. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
On page 11 of the report, number 1, halfway down, number and size of units combined with the need for obscure glazing would create an unacceptable living condition for future occupiers. That's what I felt, anyway.
So, members, I'm looking for a recommendation. Does anybody, please, may I have one? Councillor Dinas. And
I'm happy to recommend the refusal. I'm sure there'll be a second. I'm sure Councillor Townsend has already raised a hand. And I think the reasons are what we've just articulated for our grounds for refusal. I don't think there's any need to go through it again, because we've gone through it ourselves now.
Are you, officers, are you happy with it? Thank you very much. Okay, so Zach, do you want to read out this recommendation?
I can't read your writing. Can you read it? And obviously we need to have a policy reason as well.
Yes. Okay. Would you read out?
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to the debate and members' concerns regarding the application and the advice from Zach regarding the previous reason for refusal, I would suggest wording along the lines of the proposed development by reason of the insufficient parking spaces, cramped site layout, contrived internal layout would result in an overdevelopment of the site and poor living conditions for future occupants, contrary to local plan policies D1 and D4 of the 2002 plan, TD1 of the local plan part 1 2018, and the SPD for residential extensions.
We could add in the absence of a cycle store as well, couldn't we, as part of any, because one of the concerns was that shown on the plans, whilst we were
I would
suggesting
suggest the proposed development by reason of the insufficient parking spaces and cycle parking spaces. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dinas. Are you happy with that? We've seen that you're proposing it.
I am indeed. Thank you for that.
And I have a seconder in Councillor Townsend. Thank you. Okay, members, let's move to the vote. Those in favour of this amended proposal to refuse, please show by hand. And those against? Any abstentions? Sorry.
It's all right.
You got it, okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So the refusal vote is 12 for, none against, and 2 abstentions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Well, I think we gave that a good thrashing. Moving then on, I will be taking orders for breakfast at this rate. So next item is WA 2021-02464 at 40 South Street, Godalming. James Kidger is going to take us through it, I believe, James.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just share the screen. Yeah, so this is for the erection of a single dwelling to be attached to the existing semi-detached pair. This slide shows the location plan, the site outlined in red in the centre. This slide gives an aerial photograph of the site as existing, taken from the council system, and the site is just in the centre there, as indicated by the cursor. And now for some photographs of the site. This is looking partway down the hill. The subject property, again highlighted by the cursor there, and the proposed dwelling will be built toward the left-hand side in a similar shape and form to the existing layout. You can see there that the property on the left, number 40, is set back, and number 41 on the right. Another photograph here looking up the side street cul-de-sac. You can see the application site on the right-hand side, and just some context, the left-hand side showing the opposing grass verge. This is looking down from the cul-de-sac toward the site there just on the left. You can see the fence toward the rear, and the single existing parking space is just here, being indicated by the cursor next to that van. This is looking south up the hill. The subject site is on the right-hand side, hidden behind this bush here, and the cul-de-sac just there being indicated by the cursor. Houses opposite on the left-hand side. This one is looking north down the hill, the subject site in the centre there, and you can just see towards the bottom of the hill a row of terraces. And this is a closer shot of those terraces at the bottom of the hill. This is the proposed block plan. So the existing site is just this house here, being indicated by the cursor. The proposal would add a second unit just on this point here. The relationship would be the same as the existing relationship between the two houses that form the semi-detached pair. So we'll be taking a semi-detached pair to a terrace of 3. 2 parking spaces will be added at the front of the existing property, and the existing garage here at the rear of the existing property would be demolished to make way for 2 spaces at the rear, therefore the proposed property. This slide shows some elevations. Essentially, the new property is in the darker colour here on the left-hand side, the front elevation, and then from the rear, again in the darker colour, and some side elevations. You can see they're both labelled left, but actually, I think this bottom one here is the right-hand side. The relationship is stepped, so you can see it would be consistent with the existing relationship on both sides. And then the key issues here, the character of the area, so the design of the property, the appearance, impact on the character, the density, given that the existing plot would basically be halved, and you would have 2 dwellings on the site of what is 1 at the moment. Amenity of neighbours, both in terms of overbearing and overlooking, but do bear in mind that the relationship is essentially the same as that of the existing semi-detached pair. And then the parking provision, which is 2 spaces per unit. And I do have a short update. We have received 3 further representations since the report was published. They raise much the same points as have already been raised and are quoted in the report, with the exception of a number of issues that don't amount to material planning considerations. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, James. Now I understand we have a public speaker, Mr. Dyke. Chris Dyke, are you there? Would you go ahead, please?
Good evening, Chairman.
Good evening. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, committee. In relation to the plans submitted for 40 South Hill, all objections are taken from a consensus agreed by all residents at number 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and evidently 41. The 9 points are as follows. Point 1, the site is ridiculously small for another new entire house dwelling, which will be sited right up to the pavement boundary. This is completely out of character, and there are no other properties built like that on South Hill. The estate itself is already overdeveloped and densely populated. In addition, the layout and design of the rear of the proposed new house shows that it would be contravening the building line. The main sewer for our section of South Hill runs right through the middle of the proposed new house and would need to be diverted, causing disruption and inconvenience to all residents, as it will be the only road in and out of our cul-de-sac that would need digging up. Also, a loop in our sewer waste system would cause future issues and would be responsible for that, and who should be responsible for that should they occur. Inadequate number of parking spaces for the existing dwelling at number 40, which fall short of the 2.5 spaces needed for a new house dwelling unit, plus demolition of the existing garage to create an additional parking space which adjoins and actually attaches to number 39's garage, would need careful consideration and consent. The new house would overlook other properties on South Hill, plus feel like a real sense of isolation and be overshadowing for most residents, causing a loss of privacy and light. Number 41 has expressed concerns as the new house would devalue their current semi-detached home because it would essentially create 3 terrace houses, thus reducing any future potential sale. This would set a precedent for other houses to sell off garages and gardens for new housing developments, causing stress and misery for neighbours living nearby. Point 7, the new dwelling would be sited right on what is a really busy corner where sight lines for traffic at present are very difficult. Turning into and out of our close would be even more difficult with the new house sited right on the corner. Made worse still by creating new parking spaces and lowering the curb on this busy corner would cause a potential serious future highway incident. Point 8, in addition, the council's new car parking permit restrictions at the bottom of South Hill will impact our on-road parking on this corner of the hill and cause further traffic generation and sight view restrictions when turning in and out of our cul-de-sac. This being proposed by the landlord, who does not live on South Hill, is really just for financial personal gain and greed to the detriment of all other families and residents living nearby. As Councillor Kevin Denis explained earlier, this proposal is trying to squeeze a pint in a half-pint glass. And I'd like to refer to public report, page 28 of the parking conditions. But from all the residents here, we strongly reject this proposed new house dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyke. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't expect to be a member of the committee for this particular application, but as I am, I'll moderate my comments slightly. I'm the one of the 2 ward councillors for this section of Godalming, and called this in for 2 reasons. Firstly, Godalming Town Council expressed concerns regarding overdevelopment of the site. And secondly, as you've heard, there are a number of residents who have concerns about it. The bit I'm going to sort of skip over is the parking aspects. Contrary to the previous site, I do believe the site is in a sustainable place, and actually the loss of parking, it doesn't, I think from a planning perspective, doesn't cause me too much concern because it is in a relatively sustainable position. You can walk to Godalming Town Centre, you can get reasonable buses, and you can get trains. However, all of the other points regarding overdevelopment, the water, I mean, the question I've probably got for officers at the moment is I can't find any comment regarding the water infrastructure from the actual provider. We've got a no comment from Southern because it's out of area, but I don't see any other comment whatsoever from the water authorities. And I completely agree with the residents' comments on that. There is definitely some issues with development of that particular location. It does intersect, as far as I'm aware from the maps, various water infrastructure that should be commented on in this report, but isn't. Other than that, though, I think it is overdevelopment on a site that is quite small. And unless I'm given any other reason to change view from other members in the room, I do agree that it is overdevelopment of the site and should be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Any other speakers? Councillor Denis and Councillor Gale. Councillor Denis, please.
Yeah, it's just a point of clarity. Page 27, standard of accommodation. Floor area of the proposed dwelling would be approximately equal. What does that mean? It's either exceeds it or it's under. It's approximately is a bit of a wishy-washy comment. I'd just like clarity in exactly what does approximately mean. Thank you.
Officers, do we have a comment on that? I seem to remember in chemistry one weighed out accurately about, but may I have a comment, please, officers?
It is an approximate measurement, I'm afraid, Chairman, but I would just make the point that the space standards, we haven't adopted them, so we can't sort of hold them to an exact figure. I was content that it is, as I say, approximately, and I'm afraid that's all I can offer members on that point, but it's not small, shall we say, to the point where we would consider it to be detrimental to the amenity of future occupiers. But I don't have an exact figure for members now.
Thank you, James.
Sorry, could I just come back on that, please?
Yeah.
I mean, this is all to do with the amenity for the residents and future residents. I'm sorry for saying you don't know. We're trying to make a judgment, and we have to make a judgment on what the impact is on the amenity for the residents and future residents. And that's quite difficult when I've got, you know, is it a teeny weeny bit or is it quite a bit? I think we do need those figures, because I think putting that in a report is just waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Mr. Elwood would like a little word, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Denis, but I think if we hadn't mentioned this in the report at all, if you just looked at the plans about nationally, if we hadn't mentioned national space standards, this is a, you know, this is a fairly standard size, very comparable, in fact, almost identical size, 3-bedroom house to the next door and the next door and the next door. And so I think, you know, whilst I take your point that you would like the specific figures, I think using planning judgment, I don't see how on earth we could refuse permission on space standards. It's a very different case to the last application where we were, you know, we were looking at a very cramped development. This is an identical layout to existing houses, and no, I'm not aware that people have said that those are unacceptable living standards in those properties. The other question, the other point that Councillor Follows made about whether it's overdevelopment of the site and impact on character of the area and things like that, well, that's a separate matter, but that's a separate judgment. But I think we might be getting too hung up on the national space standards. As James has pointed out, we haven't adopted them. I think the use of the wording, no disrespect to James, was perhaps unfortunate, and I do agree that we you know, members need some clarity, and that's not criticism of you, James, but you know, and we'll pick that up for future reports. But I think had we not actually mentioned it in the report, I'm not sure any of the members here would have looked at this and thought that that's unacceptable amenity standard for a future home, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Zach. Councillor Gale, and then Councillor Darcy and Councillor Townsend. Councillor Gale, please, and Councillor Cotton, right? Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is with the 2 new parking spaces where they're taking out a garage at the back, and these 2 car parking spaces are going to go in one behind the other. I can't see a highways report here unless I've missed it, but surely are they going to be going in forwards, reversing out into a road? Are there any restrictions on what they can and can't do? I can't see a report there about it, but ideally they would need to be reversing into those spaces to come out in a forward motion so that they don't actually enter the oncoming traffic.
Thanks, Councillor. Sorry, just for clarity, you have a problem. What is the issue that you're...
My issue would be that they will have to reverse out of the space if they always enter in a forward motion. So surely is there a condition where they could only enter these spaces in a reverse
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
No?
Just pass it over
Yeah,
to
sure.
Zach.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't condition that because it wouldn't be enforceable for us to go and make sure that people reverse into the spaces. But the point I would make is this is a small cul-de-sac. It's a very common situation to have tandem parking. I mean, my own house, you know, it's a 3-bedroom house. Me and my partner park, you know, in tandem. It happens all the time, and I think a refusal reason based on that couldn't be justified. I think my colleague James is just going to elaborate on that in terms of the transport.
Just go ahead, James.
Just to make the point, the access wouldn't change. It's the existing access which currently leads to a driveway and a garage. So the access to the road wouldn't actually be changing. It's just that it's currently a garage and a space in front of that garage. You would take the garage down, so you would theoretically be able to get 2 cars on that driveway, and that's the only change. There will be no change to the access to the road. Thank you.
Just to come back on that, Zach, we have had things recently where parking has actually been detailed that vehicles need to enter in a forward motion and exit in a forward motion into certain places.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to Councillor Darcy, and then Councillor Townsend and Councillor Gosser. So Councillor Darcy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a question on page 34, the proposed floor plans. The existing house, there's what appears to be a toilet, I think. And then on the next page, what appears to be a bathroom, which there's a sort of hatched marking, which I presume is where there was a window. But in fact, there's now going to be a wall of the house that's being built. So I just wondered where that stood in planning terms, blocking off 2 windows to 2 rooms. In fact, they wouldn't be able to have any ventilation as far as I can work out, because you couldn't really put an expel air through into the next door's house, could you? So how would they actually be ventilated, those 2 rooms?
James, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. They're non-habitable rooms. I'm assuming we're talking about the two windows on the ground floor or the one on the first floor?
Well, both.
Yeah, I mean, none of them are habitable spaces, so they would need extractors.
And where would they go?
Oh, the bathroom on the first floor, that would need an extractor, but that's a building control issue. It's not something we would get into at this stage.
Chairman, through you, I mean, it's not beyond the wit of man to have a flue that goes up through the roof. My own house has that. I have a family bath. Sorry to go back to my own property, but we have a family bathroom and an ensuite. Sorry, not an ensuite, a downstairs cloakroom. Neither of which have natural glazing, and the extraction goes up through the roof.
I'm sure that's true.
I don't think members should be worrying themselves about minor matters such as that. I think
I don't think it's a minor matter, because what we're talking about is an existing window being bricked up. So it's not exactly a minor matter, is it? Because I mean, I don't understand.
I think the issue is whether or not it's a discrete planning point, but perhaps if Zach would.
Well, I think the point is they're non-habitable rooms. So the fact that someone may not have a natural light into a bathroom or a toilet or a hallway is not in itself so harmful to amenity as to warrant refusal. That's what I meant in terms of not wishing to worry yourselves about it, because you couldn't legitimately refuse permission and hope to win on appeal if the only reason for refusal was they were blocking off an existing window to a toilet, a lounge and a bathroom, because it happens all the time.
You keep saying, talking about refusing. I wasn't talking about refusing, I was just asking a question. Because it seems strange to me that we spend a lot of time worrying about overlooking and also about how close a wall is to another house, but we're quite happy to actually create a wall where there was a window. It just seems a bit odd.
Chairman, through you, this is the applicant's property, so they're blocking off their own window. And the point is, yes, we are concerned about amenity. The reason I mention refusal is that this development does require the blocking off those windows. So the only logical thing, if you're unhappy about that and felt it was so harmful, would be that you would recommend refusal, because there's no other way around that.
Okay, thanks, Zach. So Councillor Townsend, please, and then Councillor Cotter.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few concerns about the character of the area, and whilst you know it may not be exemplary design, perhaps. It is a very densely populated area, and the verges and the small green spaces, I think, do give more feeling of spaciousness and add something to that area and make it a more pleasant place to live. I am concerned about the fact that the house, the existing property, is going to have its cars right up to the front garden, so there's a loss of green space there, and that will be very different to the other houses I can see in the road. And whilst I appreciate the terrace of houses further down, that is further down the road on a lower area as well, and this is rising up and it's slightly more dominant on the landscape. So I am concerned that that change of character of the area, having those car parking spaces on the existing property butted right up to almost to the front door, and then the loss of the verge and the loss of the uniformity. And I think Zach mentioned a moment ago, you know, there's a whole load of semi-detached, and this is introducing a terrace in an area, in this particular area, which is full of semi-detached. And the other concern that I had was about the 45-degree rule or recommendation within the extensions SPD, because at the back, now where this property once enjoyed on the French doors looking out and nothing, you know, obscuring, they've now got the wall of the house next door, and that's equally the same as the bedrooms upstairs now that they have got, you know, a wall. And I think that whilst the people that are living in the property at the moment obviously do not have a concern about that, which is fine, but we have to look for future residential amenity. And I just wondered, you know, I remember we had this similar condition, I think, on the property in Hascombe that was building another one next to it, and I think we did say that we didn't agree with that, and I have the same reservations here about that. So that would be something that I hope that officers can answer for me. I do think that it is, you know, it does, whilst we always say we look at these applications in isolation and all that, I do think that, and I did have a wander around Google Earth in the area, and there are a few other houses which have similar sort of green verges next to them. And generally that would bring a completely different feeling of character in this area if all those corners were developed, and it would create a less open living character for those people who live there at present. So I am concerned about the character of the area, and perhaps officers could answer about the 45-degree. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, James, if you could comment certainly on the 45-degree guideline. I'd appreciate it, but
thank you,
over to you.
Yeah, on the ground floor, the living space of the existing property, the French doors on the left-hand side, but also it has a large window on the right-hand side that would be unaffected. So while the proposal may intersect the 45-degree line on the French doors, the room is also served by a large window which would be unaffected. And the other point I would make is the relationship is more or less the same as that of the existing two properties that exist currently. And if I could just take the opportunity, Chairman, just to address a couple of points that I think Councillor Follows made. There is no loss of parking on the site. There is one space currently, and there would be 4 spaces after the proposed development, so 2 spaces for each dwelling. And just a note on the water infrastructure, that would not be a planning issue. It would be something that the landowner would have to sort out with Thames Water. So whilst it may be a legitimate concern for the residents, it's not something we can consider as part of this application.
Thank you, James. Last speaker, Councillor Cotter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I know South Hill very, very well. Walked up and down it many times. And some of the comments I've I've heard don't actually relate to the South Hill. I know the concerns about building something in towards a terrace and so on. I mean, I think the officer's point very accurately describes the area. There are a whole range of different tenures in the area. There are terraces, there are semi-detached and some detached properties. There are very different property sizes in the area. It is largely and significantly a developed, fairly intensively sort of area. So what we're actually looking at is potentially, and I'm quite happy to be corrected if this is wrong, some fairly minor loss of part of a grass verge. And what we're being told is that the significant objection to this application is in terms of overdevelopment. I think in the context of this particular environment and this particular road, that's really pushing it, frankly. And if I'm to be persuaded that there is a good reason for refusing this, and I don't feel that way at the moment, I think I would need a lot better understanding of what overdevelopment actually means in that context, because it's not overdevelopment in terms of an area I understand and know quite well.
Thank you, Councillor. No other speakers, so we'll move to the recommendation, which is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 6. May I see those in favour of granting permission? Okay, and those against? Well done. Any others? Oh, okay. One abstention.
Thank you, Chairman. So the vote is 10 for, 3 against and 1 abstention. So therefore the application is carried.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Moving on now to, of course, yeah, let's hold off for 10 minutes. All right, five minutes then.
What's he saying?
All right, 5 minutes then, gentlemen. Okay, members, I think we can start again. All right, moving on to our third application tonight, WA 2021-02275, Greenmantle, Charterhouse Road, Godalming. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Just bring the slides up again. Right, Greenmantle. Currently a single dwelling. The proposal is to demolish that single dwelling, construct a terrace of 4 along with associated works. This slide shows the site boundary outlined in red there, extending a little bit further down the close and opposite the site. Showing the OS base map, just gives you a bit more context as to the wider setting of the site. The road running north-south is Charterhouse Road, Newstead Close, little cul-de-sac off the westerly side. And here we have the aerial photograph showing much the same as on the previous slide, the site here indicated by the cursor. Now some photographs of the existing site. This one shows the existing facade. From the front, the property looks like a bungalow with quite a substantial pitched roof. From the rear, given the levels, is a full 2-story property. This view looks toward the south, just showing you the facade, the fence, the roof, and just on the left-hand side there, the flats beyond. This one again looking south from the opposite side of the road. Left-hand side foreground, we have the garage opposite the site. The building adjacent to the garage is listed, a scout hut or former scout hut, grade 2 listed, and the road going down the hill towards Godalming Town Centre. This one is looking the opposite direction, north. The cul-de-sac Newstead Close on the left there, and the road curves off into the distance. This one looks down Newstead Close, approximately from the access point. Apologies for using that phrase again. And you can see just going down the cul-de-sac there, cursor sort of indicates the end of the cul-de-sac. This one showing again the cul-de-sac itself from a bit further down, the existing access to the Greenmantle property on the left, the substantial plane tree in the centre, and the 3 properties beyond just towards the end there of the shop. This one is taken from the end of Newstead Close, looking toward the existing site, Greenmantle. Again, the tree in the centre. There's a row of 3 garages there on the left, which is used by occupiers of the flats, which you can just about see behind the tree there on the left. This is a shot of the existing rear facade of Greenmantle and showing the levels change from the front. If you recall, from the front, it had the appearance of a bungalow and appeared to be quite a shallow one at that. From the rear, we got a full 2 stories and a substantial roof. And you can also see the flats beyond there, which have an additional story, so they're 3-story. This is from another angle, looking towards the rear garden of the existing site. Again, there you've got the flats on the left-hand side, and just on the right-hand side, this is number 2, Newstead Close. This is taken in the rear garden, looking toward the rear. Number 2, Newstead Close on the left, and number 1, Newstead Close, you can see there, just highlighted with the cursor. Again, the plane tree in the middle. This one, again, taken from the rear garden, looking towards the north building line. You can see there that the properties to the north are substantially higher than the existing property and are 3 stories. This one taken from the garden looking toward the south, showing the existing 3-story flats and the substantial projections there of the balconies on those flats. This one is showing both the existing block plan on the left and the proposed block plan on the right. On the proposed plan, you can just about see there the dashed line, which is the footprint of the existing property. So there will be 4 terraced units in approximately the same footprint. The footprint will be set back, so the building set back to allow room for car parking to the front, gardens to the rear, and this circle here represents the root protection area of the plane tree, which is protected. Plans have been amended since submission in order to increase the distance there. You can see it highlighted 1 meter of the distance between the extent of the root protection area and the new development. Slide 18 showing the street scenes existing on the top and proposed on the bottom. So quite a substantially different appearance, although as you can just about see with the ridge levels, the height will be approximately the same. This is the rear elevation, again existing on the top, proposed on the bottom. Substantially different appearance given the 4 gables, quite a lot of glazing, but again the ridge height is approximately the same. And this one showing the side elevations, so existing and proposed, existing at the top, proposed at the bottom, both side elevations there. And this is a swept path analysis provided by the developer, showing how those spaces to the front of the proposed building would be accessed. So there's one image for each space in turn. As you can see there, the final space, space number 8, would require what looks like a 3-point turn in order to exit that space. And this again, a swept path analysis showing how a delivery vehicle would access the site. Just to point out on this drawing, this is actually based on a superseded block plan. So you can see there that the spaces are set at an angle to the houses. If I just flick back a slide, this is the up-to-date block plan. You can see there that the spaces are parallel with the frontage. Now, I don't believe that it would make much difference to this access here, but just to point out to members that the underlying plan is not quite up to date on that one. So the key issues of this scheme, character of the area, design and appearance of the properties, the density. Of course, we're going from 1 dwelling to 4, so quite an increase in density, although it is worth bearing in mind there are flats in the vicinity. The amenity of neighbours, particularly the overlooking aspects from the rear. So they'll be adding what amounts to an additional story on the top with some consequent overlooking impacts. The parking, access and highways. So how many spaces are they providing? The 10 spaces would meet the policy requirements in the Godalming neighbourhood plan. The access arrangements and how cramped they may be, and the highways impacts, although it should be noted that the Highway Authority have considered the junction with Charterhouse Road, although not the rest of the development because that is a private road, but they have considered the junction with Charterhouse Road, and they consider that to be safe and indeed improved for pedestrians. The protected tree, which we have had substantive arboricultural information provided after the developer amended the scheme to set back the building slightly from that root protection area, and the council's tree officer is now happy with that. So we don't feel like we have any issues with the protected tree. And then finally, their drainage and flooding. It's not within a flood zone, the site. It does have elements of risk of surface water flooding, and consequently we are recommending a SUD scheme to be secured by condition were permission to be granted. We have had, in fact I'll come on to that with the update. So they were the key issues, and then a few updates since the publication of the report. Amended drawings have been received. We had concerns raised by some of the neighbours, by Councillor Williams, who is present tonight, about the access to the rear. And I'll just flick back to the block plan. So concerns were raised of access to this end of the close because there was a small protrusion near the bin pickup area. We have secured an amendment, and what you're viewing now is the amended drawing, which maintains the existing width of the close at that point. So we've already seen a swept path analysis that has been provided. We have secured the Biffers view, the waste collection company, and they have no objection on the basis that Newstead Close would be unchanged, or the width would be unchanged at the pickup location. 2 further representations have been received. Most of the points made are those that have already been made and are quoted in the report. They have raised an additional concern regarding groundwater flooding. And as you will have seen on the update sheet circulated, most of Godalming is actually highlighted at risk of groundwater flooding within the council's strategic flood risk assessment. We don't have site-specific information, but I would note that there is no policy requirement here for a flood risk assessment, or indeed for any other kind of mitigation. And officers have taken the view that on the basis that the footprint would be very similar, we don't think it's justified that further information is sought on this point. The site is on a hill, and quite how the groundwater flooding would impact the hill isn't quite clear. Logically, we would assume that it would probably impact the areas at a lower level first, and on that basis this site would appear to be slightly better positioned than others. And just to make the point, the overlooking aspect addressed in the officer's report relates to the impact on number 2, illustrated by the cursor there. And some of the neighbours have pointed out that we did not address the impacts on number 1 and number 3. Number 3 not being shown on the plan you can see on the screen. So just to fill that in for members, numbers 1 and 3 would be further away from the proposed development. The gap from the proposed development to number 2 would be 25 metres, rear elevation to side elevation. And if I can just find the plan. The distance here from unit 4 towards this rear aspect of number 1 would be 30 metres, and the angle would also be fairly oblique. And officers do not consider that to be significantly harmful to the amenity of number 1. The views offered would primarily be towards the facades of numbers 1 and number 3, and overlooking a facade of the property is not usually considered significantly harmful. So overall, we would consider there's no significant impacts in terms of amenity to numbers 1 and 3 Newstead Close. The impact on number 2 is assessed in the officer's report, and we've come down on the side of no significant harm. There is an element of subjectivity to that, and members can decide for themselves tonight. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, James. Now, members, we have 2 public speakers on this application. We have Jason Borbora and Megan Rao. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'll take Jason Borbora first, please.
Hi, good evening, councillors. We live at the bottom of Newstead Close. It's a small, already overdeveloped road, replete with existing parking and access issues, and adjoins the busy Charterhouse Road. We've sought to assist the committee's appreciation of residents' difficulties, which are going to worsen through these plans with the photos provided. We think the recommendation is strongly focused on the amenities of the proposed houses, with little focus on the impact of those in the existing community. We'd like to highlight 4 areas that should lead to the rejection of the proposal. Firstly, access. Emergency waste and delivery vehicles may be unable to access the close or pass its narrowest parts if, for example, blocked by additional bins or the increased volume of vehicles attending the new houses. This could violate, amongst other matters, the greater than 3.7 metres required for fire service access. It would also prevent feasible entry and exit from the garages on Newstead Close due to the tightness of the turning circles created. And as one family home turns into 4, the overdevelopment will create great inconvenience for residents as safe entry or exit is already difficult when houses receive visitors. For example, it's impossible to perform a 3-point turn at the bottom of the close. Inadequate parking, existing residents, particularly of the Newstead flats, whose ability to turn at the top of the close will be removed under the plans, will be required to reverse from the close onto the busy main road. And those that were familiar with Charterhouse Road will appreciate the significant hazards that this would result in. And it should be noted that the Highways Agency report has not considered residents' access to parking and focused purely on the public highway itself. Further, should the new houses receive visitors in anything larger than the standard car modelled in the swept analysis provided, then the diagram suggests this is already extremely tight and manoeuvring will create issues up and down the close. With regards to overlooking, whilst the property's height will remain roughly similar, the 7-metre movement of the footprint towards the houses at the bottom of the close, installation of a glass facade, Juliet balconies, and an additional story to the properties on Green Mantle will invade the privacy of all 3 houses at the end of the close. We believe it is also incorrect and unfair to suggest, as the report does, that number 2 Newstead Close is already overlooked, given the oblique location of the block of flats alluded to. In any respect, this situation will substantially worsen with this overdevelopment, whilst also impacting numbers 1 and 3 Newstead Close. And then finally, with regards to disruption, the nature of Newstead Close makes access to it extremely difficult. And given the enormity of demolition and building work required in the plans, it is entirely unfeasible that it could take place in such a small road without severely hampering the ability of residents to safely enter or exit, both in terms of cars and pedestrians. And we emphasise that there are a number of small children living on the close. Relatedly, whilst we note and welcome the presence of an arboricultural report, we fail to understand how it is feasible that such scale of work can be undertaken without imperiling the important plane tree, particularly as the root zone extends further than the canopy area. I'd like to thank you all once again for your time and sincerely hope that we have conveyed why this proposed further overdevelopment of an already cramped close should be rejected.
Thank you, Jason. And now if we can move to Megan Rowe. Have I got your name right? Megan, I apologise if I'm...
It's Megan Rowe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you. 4 minutes.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of our clients who've worked hard with their architect and consultants to put together a proposal which meets the requirements of local and national planning policy guidance. Working collaboratively with the case officer, our clients have then adapted the details to ensure a positive recommendation from all consultees and ultimately this recommendation for approval. Indeed, we commend your planning officer's committee report, which sets out clearly and concisely the issues and fairly assesses the proposal. The proposal involves the replacement of the existing dwelling on the site with a building of the same footprint. The ridge would be at the same elevation as the existing ridge, and the density would equate to 25.6 dwellings per hectare, which is acceptable for an edge of town centre location and is in keeping with the general pattern of development in the vicinity, where there are other examples of recently constructed dwellings of a similar density. As recommended by our client's transport consultant at RGP, access to Newstead Close will be amended as part of this development to improve safety for pedestrians as well as vehicles entering and exiting the close. The visibility displays, access and parking layout have all been reviewed and approved by the Highway Authority. The swept path analysis clearly confirms that there is sufficient space for cars to turn within the parking area and that all cars would be able to enter and leave the site in a forward gear. Furthermore, with the parking to the front of the proposed dwellings, close to the access with Charterhouse Road, the cars associated with the development will have no need to drive further into Newstead Close. There would be no change to the refuse collection since a biffa lorry already collects from the dwellings at the western end of the close. Objectors refer to the existing parking spaces to the north of the new dwellings within their letters that they are allowed to use via an informal agreement with the previous owner. This informal arrangement was terminated by my clients a year ago upon purchasing the property. The owners of the flats and the close have no right to use these spaces, and the Highway Authority has reviewed the parking provided on that basis and finds it acceptable. The objectors refer to concerns for overspill parking from the development, but this development meets parking standards of 2.5 spaces per house, as well as being located in close proximity to public transport links and walkable to the town centre. The report confirms that the tree officer is satisfied that the protected tree on the site will be adequately protected by the proposal, and the proposed condition restricting permitted development rights will further protect the tree in the future. Care has been taken with the design to ensure that any side-facing windows can be obscure glazed to prevent overlooking, and as set out by your officer in the committee report, there is a considerable distance of 25 metres to the dwelling behind. Such a separation distance is generous in a residential setting such as this and is generally acceptable in planning terms, and the report confirms that the impact on amenity is acceptable. The report also sets out how the visual amenity of the area would be improved through setting the building back and adding architectural interest where the existing dwelling currently has none. These dwellings will contribute to meeting housing need, which is a national priority, and the proposal accords with Part 1 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan, the remaining safe policies of the local plan and the advice in the NPPF, as well as the Residential Design Guide. It also accords with the draft policies of the Emerging Plan, Part 2. We therefore respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation and vote in favour of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much. Now, members, we have two ward councillors here, but Councillor Williams has brought this application to us tonight, and I guess he might like to have a little word first, and probably also the last word, which is fairly standard. So let me pass us all over to Councillor Williams first, and then anybody else. Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak as one of the two ward members. I know Newstead Close very well and have spoken to both to residents and also to the proprietor of Southern Autos, which is directly on the opposite side of Charterhouse Road, which was pointed out earlier about this development. You've heard from residents that the proposals before you will create more problems as a result of crowding more building into an already high density, overcrowded area. I think this is another case, as used the head of planning's terminology, of fitting a quart into a pint pot. And I certainly dread to think of what the impact would be likely to be during the construction phase. And that was of significant concern to Southern Autos, certainly both in terms of the road safety aspect, an accident waiting to happen, I think was the phrase used, and also in terms of the impact on the business. However, the focus, I think, in terms of planning case in this instance is around the issue of overdevelopment. And although the developer has amended the plans twice in relation to some of the residents' objections, I would still see the proposal as unacceptable in that sense. If members of the committee know Newstead Close off Charterhouse Road, you will be aware that we are talking about an already overdeveloped site. I drove down there today. Entered the cul-de-sac with my car in a forward gear and without any turning circle at the end, without kind of encroaching on other properties and taking advantage of informal agreements, I managed to get out in a forward gear as a result of a maneuver which I think I would describe as an 11-point turn. Now, we're talking here about 4 additional dwellings which will significantly increase vehicle movements within the site. So we're talking about vehicle movements within the site, as has been described, rather than the impact on the highway, which Surrey County Council has commented on. So notwithstanding the proposed landscaping, the additional parking, apart from causing these additional traffic movements, it will mean more hard standing on the site, which I fear could both reduce biodiversity, certainly have an adverse impact on biodiversity on the site, and provide potential drainage issues in relation to surface water with increased flooding risk, which is actually a risk. And in that sense, I disagree, having seen the site, with the judgments of the planning officer. So the proposal, in essence, is one, I think, of overdevelopment, further developing an already overdeveloped site, and with a design that does not, in my view, fit easily into the street scene of established older style buildings. And as the resident has pointed out, it's a design that incurs overlooking, particularly in relation to the property immediately behind the proposed development to Newstead Close. That is a direct overlooking and undoubtedly affecting the amenity of neighbours. So I would ask members of the committee to give the utmost consideration to those significant planning objections before making your decision this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Cotter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm also a ward councillor for this area, and like Councillor Williams, have engaged quite a lot on this application, and it's caused me quite a degree of concern. And I did support the proposal from Councillor Williams that we should have this called in because of the amount of that concern. In terms of those representations that have been made directly to me and those that I have read on the website, it seemed to me that there were three significant areas that needed to be looked at in terms of this application. The first one was the concern actually about the tree, which hasn't been much talked about so far, but it is a very significant tree in the context of that particular residential area. It dominates and adds significantly to residential amenity. And I do note that in response to some concerns, the footprint of the proposal has been moved by a metre because of the root protection area and the rights for permitted development, automatic permitted development, have been removed to try and safeguard it. I'm told that our tree officer now finds it acceptable. I'm not sure, I guess we have to accept that. I have no reason to doubt his professional judgment. All I can say is I hope he's got it right, because in these, and there is a tree survey, of course, as well from the developers, and I understand that, but I hope they have got it right, because if there is any damage in this area, it's going to be of serious detriment to that area. So that's the first area. The second area concerned a number of the comments and were about overdevelopment and inappropriate development and so on. And I have to say, being as objective as I can, it might be in my wall, but I try and be subjective with all applications as a member of the committee. I find that one quite difficult to sustain. If you look at the existing building, it's pretty much the same size as the four that are going to replace it, and it's going to be set back a little further. Yes, the design is different, but there is nothing major or significant in terms of bulk or overdevelopment that I feel we could sustain. Which brings me to my third area, which is the one that does cause me real concern, and that is the one about the parking and the access on the site itself. Prior to Councillor Williams, I did the same thing, actually. When I can walk down to the site, but I thought I would deliberately drive down. And I drove down to the site, and I went right down what is, as members would have seen from the pictures, a very, very narrow road indeed. And at one point, it was quite difficult even to get by because there was another vehicle there delivering and so on. I got down to the end, found it was quite impossible to turn my vehicle. And so slowly but surely started to reverse all the way back up towards Charterhouse Road. And this was in the daytime, and found nowhere that actually, until I got right to the top, to the access, I could reverse round and turn my vehicle round. And then, like Councillor Williams, it was quite a stretch even there to actually get the vehicle turned. I have a real worry that with the extra traffic, and I know the development's right at the top there and so on, but with the extra traffic that's going to be generated on this site, I just worry considerably about the potential for more movements of that kind becoming necessary. And I guess I don't need to tell any members of this committee just how dangerous Charterhouse Road is. There is no significant parking on the road itself, nor should there be. There's one lay-by opposite, just further up the road for some flats. But trying to go out onto that road is a nightmare. There have been major accidents in that area. When I was the county councillor there, we put a lot of traffic calming in, which was only partly successful. So I have real worries and real concern about that, Chairman. I'd like just some further comment, I think, before we conclude this debate from our officers about the fact that I do understand, and it may or may not be helpful. Highways officers have again basically said they are satisfied with the new design onto the road and so on. But what I understood you to say, and what I understand to be the position, is because this is a private road, they have taken no account of some of the issues that I'm trying to describe now about the sheer difficulty of getting around this site. So I will listen to colleagues, as I always do, Chairman, before making my mind up. But I think my main and residual concern is about the additional traffic movements on the site and the problems that is going to cause, which are already pretty much almost unacceptable and dangerous in my view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gossett. Can I just clarify, James, that there is a proposal to make extra turning from Newstead close onto Charterhouse? There's an extra roundy bit been added on at the end, is that right? Just the corners are curved off. If not, just tell me to shut up and I will.
The only additional turning space, shall we say, would be within the forecourt of the building itself. So right, where the 8 spaces are on the block plan.
I'm talking about the exit onto Charterhouse Road.
The chairman's asking about the visibility display, the actual entrance onto Charterhouse Road, whether that's changed.
Yes. So that would be, there would be a footway, an extended footway provided on the curb there, which would reduce the width, I think, from 8.2 meters approximately to 6 meters. That is the bit that has been explicitly assessed by the Highway Authority, and they consider that aspect to be acceptable. Just to pick up on Councillor Costa's point about what the Highway Authority have assessed and what they haven't, my understanding is, as per Councillor Costa, that they may not have assessed the remainder, which is a private road. I did ask them for clarification on that. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get back to me. In the absence of that clarification, my understanding is they would have assessed the junction with Charterhouse Road, which is a classified road, but in terms of manoeuvring within the site, anything on the private road, my understanding is they may not have assessed that.
Okay, thanks, James. Councillor Follows, please.
Thank you, Chair. Going through a couple of the comments, I have to agree regarding the size of the site. I can't see that as being materially different from the existing building. Certainly not sufficient for an objection, I think, to stand up to any further scrutiny. But the issue with the traffic, I mean, the fact that it's providing 2.5 per unit, so 10, we have to conclude that there is a possibility for 10 additional cars there at maximum. I think even the addition of 1 or 2 is likely to cause an increase in an already existing issue. I think the bit that I'm curious about, I can't recall being here and looking at an issue where we've got a bit of where the primary traffic issue, well, I say the primary, one of the primary traffic issues, I think the Charterhouse Road issue, I think can be taken as read by anybody who's remotely driven or walked up that particular bit. But it is dangerous as it is, and adding more won't be a great thing. But if the Highways Authority hasn't actually assessed a bit that we think might be a material issue, are we entitled to use our judgment appropriately in making our decision? If I could have an answer on that bit before I carry on, please, Chair, if that'd be all right.
James, would you comment on that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So just to clarify that, yes, the assessment has been made at the point at which it joins the highway network, and there is a material improvement in the highway safety there in terms of the visibility displays that are going to be provided. With regards to the internal layout of the site, that is a matter for us to consider, but the fact of the matter is the development has shown to be able to provide its own parking and turning for vehicles to enter the site and exit it in a forward gear. I appreciate the concerns that members have, and I myself know that stretch of Charterhouse Road very well. But really, we are talking about the existing situation on that site. And, you know, from our point of view, because the development can accommodate its own parking and turning, it is a judgment, but we feel that it would not be a strong reason to resist the development based on assumptions about other vehicles that may enter the site and go further down that private road. So, as I say, it is a judgment for members to make, but the internal layout, the applicant has provided the tracking information to indicate that the number of cars generated by that development can be parked and enter and exit the site in that front forecourt and 2 additional spaces in a safe way. So, you know, I would be hesitant to suggest that you would hinge any kind of safety concerns onto the internal layout of the site. Members may take a view that the parking is just one element of the site that is unsatisfactory and leads to an overall overdevelopment of the site. But I would strongly advise you not to go down the highway safety route with regards to the internal layout of what is a private site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Follow, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, so a little bit what I was actually going to say there. So thank you for that. I do think on its own, it probably wouldn't merit the sorts of objections, but I'm actually going to be suggesting that in combination that it does. I think the issue for me is not just the volume of cars. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's acceptable, that amount of space. I do think it will be issues, but I accept your point entirely that it will be a relatively weak objection on its own right. But that number, as Councillor Costa and Councillor Williams have illustrated, going up and down the adjoining roads and access to it in general is already strained even in the daytime. I think the issue for me is the number of journeys that will be increased by the quantum of cars that's being added to this. So I think my second request to officers would be, if we're talking about in combination traffic effects and impacts, in the absence of any definitive statement from the Highways Authority saying that this is a good, bad, or anything else, in fact, the absence of any other statement other than the visibility display at the Charterhouse Road end, in combination, I do believe there are traffic issues that probably are material and constitute overdevelopment. I'll obviously listen to other members, but certainly for me, that would be a deal breaker at this point.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hegan.
I have to confess not being particularly familiar with this close till I very foolishly did my site exploration in the dark and the rain last night. And getting out of there was terrifying. But I think we're using the word site in 2 contexts this evening. I think in planning terms, we're only talking about the actual development site, the access to which doesn't materially change the circumstances of the rest of the close. And it would concern me to focus too much on what is a nightmare, because I don't think we're adding to it by the proposal. And therefore I can't at this stage see myself objecting to the application on those issues, even though I think they are horrific. And I hate the look of it, but again, I don't think it's enough to base an objection. So I have listened very carefully and really share the concerns, but I'm not sure that they're sufficient to take me to a refusal.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Darcy, please.
Thank you. I was interested in the car parking diagrams that showed people reversing in, because looking at the plan, it appears that the car parking spaces are 4,800 millimeters. Is that correct? And that the 6050 space between the house and the parking space. I don't know if you know, but the average car length in the UK is 4.4 meters, but quite a lot of cars are bigger than that. So for example, a BMW 5 Series is 4.98, which would be 5 meters approximately, which wouldn't fit into one of those spaces, even if you parked right up to the end. So obviously there would be some cars that would be sticking out considerably. Range Rover is 5 meters long. Ford Transit is 5.5 meters. Now, I'm not supposing that everybody's going to have a Ford Transit, but there might be somebody who has. So realistically, you could get in and out if there were no other cars there into all of those spaces, but you could no way get in and out to all of those spaces if the other ones were all occupied, especially if the cars that are occupying them were above average in length, which is perfectly possible that they would be. So I'm a bit confused. Also, there's no mention of the width on this thing of each of those parking spaces. But if you want to know about car widths, then a Ford Transit is 2.5 meters wide and a Range Rover is 2 meters wide. So I think you'd really struggle to get 8 vehicles into that space. And I simply don't believe the parking things that they provided. They provided them, didn't they? Not an independent body. Have they been verified by an independent body?
James, would you just confirm that or not?
Yeah, they've been provided by a transport consultant acting on behalf of the applicant. But well, it would be a professional transport consultant with a reputation to protect. You can take that for what it's worth.
All right, thank you, James. Okay, I have 3 more speakers: Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Townsend, and finally Councillor Goodrich. So, Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, when I looked at this, and I took the view that what happens beyond the development is nothing, that there is nothing we can do about it. But noting where the parking is now, at the moment, the parking for the Green Mantles is actually behind the building, which takes it further down the lane. So you could look at it as being a slight improvement because they have a better view of the road when getting out, and they're nearer to the road, further away from their neighbors. The other thing I thought was having a porous surface on the parking area is something that we often talk about, and I think it is something that we should look at almost every time we look at parking plots, and I wonder if that could be a condition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Townsend, and then Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I have to agree with Councillor Darcy. I'm really serious concerns about the size of the parking spaces for this. Whilst I know that, you know, the average car has grown since the 70s, it's grown by about 55% actually, apparently, but it's the car parking spaces, the standard car parking spaces haven't. However, these, it looks like, and you know, I'd like to be corrected perhaps, that these are just the standard 2.4 by 4.8 kind of sizes, which will be very difficult for someone to get children in and out of if 2 cars are parked next to each other. But the thing that concerns me even more than that is that if you are disabled, you need a bigger space. So nobody disabled can actually live in these properties because there is not a big enough space for them to have. A disabled car needs about 3.6 by 5 meters space. And there isn't that facility available here. And I really think that seriously, we should have been looking at providing at least 1 disabled space in an area that is so big so that somebody has got the option of buying a property here. I hate the fact that spaces 9 and 10 are across the road. I think that is awful. I imagine people perhaps, you know, carrying things across the road, people swinging in. I really don't like it. I think it's a bit mean-spirited that they took those spaces away from the flats that were there, actually, but that's by the by. I also think that there is nothing about sustainability. We're building 4 new houses here, and we've got nothing about sustainability. We've got no solar panels. We've got no mention of anything to do with any kind of sustainable, no energy statement, no nothing. And whilst, you know, we with other applications, we're only getting 1 property, perhaps even then we should be looking at it. But here, I really think that we should be looking at some kind of energy statement. The other thing is in the BAT survey, it did recommend BAT boxes. It did say we should put BAT boxes into the properties. That's not been conditioned at all. And if, you know, if members are minded to approve this, which I shall not be approving, I'm afraid, I would say that we definitely need to put that condition in because it's been recommended, and I always you know, really dislike it when we don't take the tiny little grabs of biodiversity that we've got the option to have, which are frankly minuscule. We should be grabbing those with both hands and trying to do something with them. So that is my major concern is the parking. I don't think it's adequate for these properties, and I think it is whilst the lovely little drawings, like little squiggly things, are, you know, indicative of how they expect people to get out. I'm telling you, the first property right down the end, if you are trying to get out that space and your partner's already in the other space, other member of the household, you're going to have difficulty getting in and out if their car is any bit longer, or maybe a little tow bar on the end. So I will not be approving this application because it's overdevelopment of this site and there's inadequate parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I know this area very well because I've known people who have lived in the close, and indeed one of the former owners of Greenmantle. So I know the area well. The fact that Newstead Close is a nightmare to go down the end, turn around and come out is a nightmare now, and it will remain a nightmare whether this application is granted or not, because it's not going to, in my view, adversely affect what is a badly designed close, particularly for those that want to turn around at the end. And bearing in mind that people using the site only come about 3 car lengths into Newstead Close before they turn into their parking, seems to me to be no planning reason on highway grounds on the private road to turn it down. And I note what Councillor Townsend has said, but do we have a firm of that have given advice and say it would work? I don't consider myself an expert who can overrule that. So as things stand at the moment, I would propose to go with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. As there's no other speakers, let's move to the recommendation that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 14 and informatives 1 to 5.
The issue about size of cars and whether these parking spaces will work or not seems to be quite critical to me, and we've had no sort of officer response on that. I think it will be valuable to at least have that before we vote.
Okay, Zach, well, can you respond?
I hear what's being said by members about modern cars, but our current adopted parking standards advocate 4.8 by 2.4 as far as I'm aware, unless Kat's going to correct me. I'm not saying that necessarily meets modern standards, but that is our adopted size of space. And so they're providing 2.5 spaces per unit, the 10 spaces for 4 dwellings. At our adopted standard, it becomes very difficult there to put forward an argument that would be sustainable on appeal.
Okay, now I thought we were going to come to a more rapid conclusion. I've got a couple of extra speakers, and I know that Councillor Williams will want to have the final word, and I had forgotten about you. My apologies. So I think on my numbers here, Councillor Hegan, you want to come back, followed by Councillor Follows coming back, followed by Councillor Williams with the last word. So Councillor Hegan, please.
I just wanted to propose extra conditions, taking on board Councillor Wilson's point about permeable surface for the parking, if that's feasible, and Councillor Townsend's proposal on the back boxes. So before we go to the vote, I would certainly want to propose extra conditions.
Okay, James, you want the word?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. If I can just clarify that condition 5 within the report already secures permeable hard standing, but we can certainly add the back boxes condition if members are minded to request that.
Okay, so Councillor Hegan, do you want to make an amendment to that condition? And I guess we need to vote on that, do we? Or come on? Okay, so adding back boxes to condition number 5.
No.
All right, the new condition. Wow, thank you. What would I do without officers? Okay, so looking for a back box additional condition and sticking with condition 5 as it is. May I see those in favour?
Sorry, Chairman, could I just interject there just slightly? Could it just be that, you know, the obviously it does actually state the condition is within the report of the David Archer, the report, he does state it. So the wording should probably be taken perhaps from there. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Townsend, can you just take me through that again? Which in condition 5?
But the new one for the back boxes.
Yes, right, okay. So additional condition to do with back boxes. Those in favour of additional back boxes? Oh, yeah, sorry. Before we do that, put your hands down. May I have a seconder for Councillor Hegan's proposal? Thank you, Councillor Darcy. Right, those in favour of this proposal, please show. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Sadler. So that?
Chairman, that is 13 for, none against, and 1 abstention.
Right. So, members, I presume that we can now move to the main recommendation.
I think you were bringing Councillor
Williams too.
Oh, yes.
And Councillor Follows when they come back.
It's time for my pill, isn't it, really? Okay. So, okay, so Councillor Hegan, you've spoken. Thank you very much. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back. 90% of what I was going to do was propose the things that Councillor Hegan mentioned. So that's great that that's happened. I think my only remaining comment is that as much as I understand Councillor Goodridge's point, the traffic consultant is a paid traffic consultant, and I'm not going to treat it like it's the Statutory Highways Authority making a comment. For that reason, I will not be supporting this application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and then Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brief because there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of discussion around vehicle movements on the site. And I take on board the planning officer's comments regarding highway safety being not a pertinent issue in terms of the main highway, even though we know that there are potential problems there if we know the site, if we know the area. But on-site vehicle movements are relevant because they are indicative of what is clearly an overdevelopment. Councillor Darcy and Councillor Townsend have outlined the reality of the parking arrangements and the in-out movements of vehicles in relation to the new dwellings, and I won't repeat that, but it is the case that the parking spaces are small. The swept path analysis, as far as I can see, is utterly unrealistic. We are talking about cramming 4 dwellings into the existing footprint. And although the height is not being affected, clearly the impact of having those 4 dwellings and the aspect of those dwellings in terms of overlooking number 2 Newstead Close, I believe are significant reasons, along with perhaps 1 or 2 of the other points that councillors have made, to object to this application. So I would suggest that members reject this application. It is 4 dwellings we're talking about here into an already overcrowded site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Well, unless I've messed up again, I guess we can move to the recommendation at last that permission be granted, subject to the conditions are stated plus 1 more on back boxes and informatives 1 to 5. May I see those in favour of granting permission for this application? Those against? And any abstentions?
Thank you, Chairman. So the results of that are 6 for, 7 against and 1 abstention.
So I should be looking then for a recommendation for reasons to reject this application. May I have Councillor Follows?
I'm sure this is going to need some wordsmithing. I think there's overdevelopment, which is caused partly by in combination traffic effects. There might be some parking, other issues that we might want to add here, but I'd be looking to officers for guidance as to what the most appropriate would be. But I think overdevelopment, because of the in combination of traffic impacts, would be part of this.
Thank you. Any other suggestions from members? Councillor Townsend?
Thank you, Chairman. I was also suggesting perhaps it being out of character, perhaps we could mention something about the impact on the character of the area. Perhaps we could also mention about the impact on overlooking on number 2, the cramped conditions, so the scale and mass maybe of the actual, whilst it's a similar size to the existing. Now I'm having a problem with that one. Perhaps, I mean, for me, it is the parking and the inadequate provision. So that creates the cramped effect because you're trying to fit too many spaces within that area. So while Surrey Highways haven't commented because it's a private road, we can use our judgment on that one. And my judgment is that it's too many spaces and they're not big enough.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like Mr. Elwood just to give us a word, please.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't want to disagree with you, Councillor Townsend, too much, but I do have concerns about the comments about overlooking and impact on number 2. There's a very good separation distance still there, and I think that would be a weak argument. I think the argument about character and overdevelopment is evidenced partly through a contrived parking arrangement, albeit it technically meets our parking standards. You know, as James pointed out himself, you have got 1 or 2 spaces that are rather cramped, and I think what you're saying to me is it's not necessarily a highway safety issue. It's more of a combination of the disturbance and inconvenience to other people in the area and the amenities. The other point that you've sort of touched on in terms of design and overdevelopment, I suppose the only other thing that I would pick up on, but members may disagree with me, is if you look at the character in the area of the sort of plot sizes, surrounding properties. If you just look to the North Air Meadowside, Summerside, Newstead. Number 2, number 1, number 3, they're all set in particularly spacious plots, whereas what we'd have here is 4 units, all with fairly small gardens. I'm not saying in themselves the gardens are inadequate, but you could make a point that that's not in keeping with the pattern of development in terms of the spatial quality of the area.
And
if that was what you felt in terms of.
Could you state lack of outdoor amenity space as well, because the gardens do look particularly.
And there are neighbourhood plan policies that reflect that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
hang on, members. Let's see if somebody is prepared to make a recommendation. I don't want us to be talking across each other at the time. Councillor Follows.
Thank you. I'll try and sum up what we've been talking about. So I think there is overdevelopment constituted by the in combination traffic effects, both on the site because of the parking, although technically within standards, it is definitely contrived. The impacts on the surrounding area, and I believe that's within our judgment because it's not been assessed by the Statutory Highways Authority one way or the other. The site, due to its density, is out of character and contravenes at least one of the neighbourhood plan policies of the Godalming and Farncombe neighbourhood plan. Off the top of my head, I think it's God 5, but I'd have to double check. So overdevelopment through traffic and impact on the character of the area as the 2 main.
Yeah, Chairman. Yeah, sorry, through you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I accept those arguments, and I think that they're defendable. I think I would struggle to say that I would be reluctant if it were me drafting the response, the refusal, to say that the garden sizes themselves are inadequate. What I think we're saying is they're not necessarily in keeping with the prevailing spatial character and quality of the area and the pattern of development. I mean, you do have properties on Dean Road to the west, which have even they have larger gardens than these would be, and that's partly because obviously by moving the building backwards within the site to accommodate the 8 spaces at the front, that has impacted on the size of the gardens available to the rear. So I think there could be a reasonable argument made that is indicative of overdevelopment in itself in terms of the spatial character of the area, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Zach. Councillor Else, please.
Could I just have some clarification from the officers then? The rear gardens.
Yes, that's why I would be reluctant. Yes, that's quite right, Councillor.
Chairman, we can't hear anything on the Zoom.
I'm terribly sorry, Georgina. I was just asking Zach if he could confirm that the rear gardens shown on the site plan are in fact larger than Waverley's minimum size for a rear garden, that the parking spaces at the front are in accordance with our standards, and the turning space for the parking is in accordance with our standards. So I'm struggling to find how we can say that it's all inadequate, but I think we are allowed to speak to an amendment, aren't we?
Well, I think so. Do you want to? Okay, Zach, if you'd like to comment on that, but Councillor Else, I agree.
Well, Councillor Else made some very valid points about the strict application of standards, but I think what's being discussed here is the overall cumulative impact of this development in terms of the character and appearance of the area, in terms of having 4 properties on that site, whilst they themselves might meet standards, you can look at the wider context. You have to look at the wider context, in fact, to see if it fits in with the, that's what good design is all about, something that is contextual with its surroundings. But sorry.
Can I just come back on that, please, Chairman? And all I'm saying is that how are we going to put in reasons for refusal that accord with our standards? I just don't understand what we're doing here.
Councillor Follows.
As I'm sure many in the room are keen to support neighbourhood plans and the policies that are in them as much as possible. God 5, as I alluded to, which is character and design, obviously of the made Godalming neighbourhood, Godalming and Farncombe neighbourhood plan. Part B, avoid the appearance of cramming by reflecting within the established plots with plot widths within the street. And part C, be in keeping with the former development of properties in the immediate surrounding areas. I would argue that it definitely does not do either of those two things. And part of that is the in combination impacts of some of the things we've been talking about. But for me, it does not meet the character of the surrounding plots and contravenes certainly the spirit of what we're trying to achieve in the neighbourhood plan policies.
Okay, now I have Councillor Gossett. Okay, Councillor Williams. Yeah.
No, I think the point was made that it's not in keeping with the street scene. Right. I mean, that's
as
fine.
I said, you've had your last word
Fine.
already.
Thank you.
Otherwise,
I won't say anything else.
Otherwise, you have to come and join us permanently. Sorry, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know the area, but looking at the diagrams on page 50, and I know people have talked about, and we have agreed to include that it's not in keeping with the street scene, but looking at this, the bulk and mass of the proposed replacement building is totally overbearing. And I wondered whether those two words would be included.
Zach, please.
My own professional advice would be no. This is a very similar scale to the existing building and is set back from the street scene. To me, it's more about, I mean, obviously officers have recommended approval. So, but taking forward the arguments that I've heard this evening, it would be more about the overall density and character of the area. And I do accept Councillor Ellis's points about strict appliance of standards, but the neighbourhood policies and those neighbourhood plan policies are reflected in our local plan policies around contextual development, spatial quality of areas, etc. And I'm sure the officers will pick that up through the adopted local plan policies and the safe local plan policies. Yeah.
Okay, let me move to the lady with the frown. Kate, would you?
Sorry, Chairman, I've been listening to members' deliberations on this, and I have got a suggested reason for refusal that I think encompasses all of the concerns expressed. So I'll read that out to you now, and you can tell me how you would like it amended. So I propose the density and amount of development proposed, together with the contrived parking layout and plot sizes, are symptomatic of the overdevelopment of the site and would be harmful to the spatial character and appearance of the area, and would also lead to inconvenience to the occupiers of other properties in the locality, contrary to retained policies D1 and D4 of the Local Plan 2002, policy TD1 of the Local Plan Part 1 2018, and policy GOD5 of the Godalming Neighbourhood Plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Follows, do you
I
agree
couldn't
with
have put it better. I couldn't have put it better myself. I'm very happy to support
that. So in which case, may I have a seconder for that? Councillor Costa, thank you very much indeed. Okay, right. Now, members, we have a reason to refuse, or a proposal to refuse. May I see those in favour of this refusal? And those against? And abstentions?
Thank you, Chairman. That's 9 for, 4 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Right. Well done, members. Last one in front of us then is number 4, WA 2021-02308, land south of Dunsfold Road and east of High Loxley Road, Godalming. If Tracy is still with us, Tracy, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Am I off mute? I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Super. Thank you, Chairman. The application before you is for the erection of a cattle finishing unit sited on land to the south of Dunsfold Road and east of High Loxley Road. This aerial image shows the location of the proposal, providing context to the surroundings. A barn that has been erected in close proximity to the application site is not depicted on this image. It's this barn here. The application site comprises agricultural land. At present, 1 storage barn is located just to the west of this application site. Members may be familiar with this site as a recent application regarding a temporary agricultural workers mobile home was considered at committee in November last year. The proposal seeks permission for the erection of a cattle finishing unit. The building would be large in plan. However, it would be located on an area of land which is naturally lower. The building would be provided with some screening in the form of woodland to the east. By overlaying the location plan onto the aerial image, I hope this demonstrates more clearly. The boundaries of the surrounding agricultural fields would also provide some screening. The block plan shows the relationship of the proposed barn to that of the existing storage barn on site. The proposed agricultural building will also utilise the existing access. The plans for the cattle unit indicate that the building is typical in design of an agricultural building, suitable for its intended use to house livestock. The officer report includes a section on page 58 of the agenda pack, outlining the agricultural justification for the proposal. The building is considered to be reasonably necessary for the purpose of agriculture, and as stated and as shown in the drawings, contains no additional floor space or accommodation over and above that required for the agricultural purpose. Whilst the elevation shown indicates that the eastern elevation, it's this one here indicated by the cursor, would be open-sided, we have been notified that this will be enclosed by means of gates. If members are concerned, then these details of this elevational treatment and the gates can be secured via a planning condition. The view available from Hascombe Hill has been raised by many during the application, and as such, it's important to put this into context. The image on the left is the view available from Hascombe Hill, which is within the AONB. The actual site that the application site is not in the AONB, but it falls within an area of great landscape value. You may be able to see the existing barn just here. The proposed building would be of a similar height to this, and it would be located on this area of ground, which is naturally lower. The orientation of the proposal also means the shortest or smallest elevation would be visible. Images on the right are of other agricultural development that is visible from Hascombe Hill. Officers consider in detail the impact upon the landscapes at section 12 of the officer report, concluding that the proposal would not likely appear as an incongruent feature within the landscape, particularly in the context of Dunsfold in the background of vistas from Hascombe Hill. As such, the key matters for consideration are the impact upon the landscape, agricultural justification, impact on residential amenity, with the officer recommendation for approval subject to the conditions and informatives. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tracy. We have two public speakers on this item. First is Tom Gordon. Tom, are you there? Tom Gordon.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I've got a very bad internet connection at the moment. Would you mind if I don't turn my video on?
Perfectly fine. People want me to do the same usually, but for other reasons. Carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. Just 1 second, please. The applicant refers to this land as Locksley Park Farm. It's not a farm and it's never been registered as such, and it's not part of an existing unit. It's a field that the applicant purchased from High Locksley Farm with the express intention of leasing it to UCOG to explore for oil and gas. From the start, the applicant has made it clear that his ultimate intention is to develop a residential property for himself on this land, demonstrated now by a further application submitted for a 4-bedroom dwelling with various outbuildings, kennels, car park and gardens. He states that this land represents the core of his business, yet in previous applications he has cited that he has grazing agreements on over 4,000 acres of land. So I ask, how can this 80-acre grazing field, a proportion of which is leased to UCOG, possibly represent the core of his business, which has been successfully running now for over 20 years? The report states that the farming business is profitable under its current trading model, and the use of this field as grazing for sheep and cattle is an essential part of that model. The constraints of the application site were well known at the time of the purchase, and there is neither a need to diversify or a base on which to develop zero-grazed, intensive farming on a field where grazing is a core part of the business. Disingenuous associations in this application and others have been made by trying to connect the previous relationship between this land and that of High Locksley Farm, to which it once belonged. This association no longer exists. It's a field situated within the AGLV with a public bridleway running through it in clear view of Hascombe Hill AONB. The land itself is currently under evaluation by Natural England for inclusion within the AONB, and a precautionary approach should presumably be taken when considering any development within this area. The application is for a proposed licensed finishing unit, as I understand it, to quarantine livestock imported from high-risk TB1 areas into Waverley, which is designated as TB4 low-risk grazing area, privileged with the free movement of livestock. Units such as these are not flawless, and testing is by no means a guarantee of safety, and so this unit poses a real and unnecessary threat. Little wonder that the local farming community are all up in arms against this proposal, and their concerns should not be dismissed as the officer's recommendation suggests. If the planning authority is approving the erection of an LFU, then they should require the applicant to submit evidence that the proposed building will meet the government requirements as to capacity, biosecurity, protocols and design. The transport survey produced by the applicant himself cannot seriously be considered acceptable. My farm adjoins this land and we share the same access along High Locksley Road, which is a narrow single-track lane where obstructions can easily occur, and I am quite aware of the weekly transport movements. The supporting photographic evidence of the vehicles stated as being from the previous week and submitted in November show the trees in full summer foliage. Surely this report cannot be considered acceptable evidence for a highways report to accompany an application of this nature. Policy RE1 and RE3 states that countryside and AGLV will be safeguarded and recognised. Policy RD9 of Safe Policy states that development will not be permitted which would result in the loss or alienation of the best and most versatile agricultural land, nor fragmentation of agricultural holdings. Considering to grant permission for this development is wrong. It goes against the policies and safeguards put in place to help protect our rural countryside from unscrupulous and unnecessary development, and it would set a precedent for anyone wishing to build whatever they want, whenever they want, under the pretext of farming. I therefore urge you to refuse this permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And Ashley Ward, please. Ashley? You might be mute.
Yes, I think I'm live now, am I not?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, members and officers for your time this evening. As the applicant and a farmer, I'm going to share your view, literally. that the countryside that we all treasure has not happened by chance. It is largely shaped and maintained by centuries of farming activity. I am often reminded by people I meet that they love to see the sheep and the cattle, the rich pastures and the abundant birds in our hedgerows. This hasn't happened by chance. It takes hard work, tending to the livestock, managing the grazing, improving the soil, the organic matter and fertility, planting new hedges, growing crops for winter feed and farmland birds. This is my life day in and day out, and we love it. But we're also making a living at it for us and our staff. This is not a new business. It is over 20 years in the making here in Dunsfold alone, and generations old nearby on the Sussex borders. It is only sustainable because we do good practice with the environment, the land, the livestock, and our loyal staff. If we do the core things well, we can earn a living, but we need to reduce the risks too. And we have to adapt to change. We have Brexit, the end of the Common Agricultural Policy, new and as yet uncertain farming policies for the UK, demands for higher animal welfare, rising costs and competition. My business needs to invest and develop as farms always have. Policy RD10 is the dominant policy for agricultural development, and it is entirely fit for purpose. This proposal is fully compliant. This proposal today is absolutely necessary for my cattle business now and in the future. Taken as a whole, my farming delivers on sustainability, and therefore it should benefit from a presumption in favour and be acceptable today, as your officers have recommended. This building is modern, it's hygienic and well designed. When full, it will house up to 250 head of cattle in ideal conditions. They will be fed a 5-star diet and allow me to produce superb quality beef 52 weeks of the year. It will never be too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, too much grass, too little grass. You probably think I'm moaning about the weather. It's what farmers do. No, these factors are risk factors which affect how my animals perform every day when they are outside in my care. These are factors which can ruin my production cycle, and this building can eliminate those risks. Your officers say that this building, of this building, it is well related to the character of the rural area. So we are putting up a cattle shed on a mixed farm in the countryside, which is farmed for cattle to reduce risk. Oh yes, it is related to the rural area. It will be clad with real timber and soft blue-grey roof sheeting. It sits in a discreet low part of the field and it will be landscaped. Again, your officers say it will not harm the intrinsic beauty of the AGLV or the setting of the ANOB. We do our job very well, and this building will be the same. It will be high quality and will not dominate the field that it stands in, let alone the wider countryside around it. You've seen the pictures from your officer. Now, to finish, I must deal with the elephant in the barn. Sorry, corner. Much has been said about the risk of TB. Councillors Denis and Gray have run with the idea initially fired off by our celebrity farmer, Mr. Grant Roffey. Literature tells us 3 things cannot be retrieved: the arrow sped from a bow, the word spoken in haste, and a missed opportunity. The fact of the TB risk and this building is the polar opposite of the fiction that you have heard and seen from objectors, including Tom. He also stated that we farmed 4,000 acres. That is nowhere in context. We farm up to 1,200 acres and typically 1,000. Officially owned.
Mr. Ward, if you would sum up very quickly, please.
I will absolutely. The point I want to finish on, the only officially TB-free cattle can enter this building. They will not come into contact with other animals or wildlife and cannot be infected or be infected with TB. Therefore, there is no risk to my neighbours, wildlife, and there is the risk of disruption to my business from TB, and the impact of infections locally are eliminated from my business. No strain on my livestock, my stock, my staff, or my pocket. Let me be clear, if you own cattle or camelids, you are at risk of having infected animals.
Can we wrap up, please, sir?
Yes, I will. I have 2 more sentences. I would reasonably argue that if you only test every 4 years, as you're required in Surrey, then then most of the time you live on hope. You're not
very much,
testing, you
Mr.
don't
Ward.
know.
I will have to stop you there. Thank you very much for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
We have a third speaker tonight, a representative of Dunsfold Parish Council, Councillor Stephen Hayward. I hadn't forgotten you, it's just I couldn't count beyond two. I'm sorry. Councillor Hayward, please.
That's okay. Thank you. Good evening. Dunsfold Parish Council considers that it's important to point out, as has already been done, that this application is for a very specific type of cattle finishing unit known as a licensed finishing unit, as explained in the agricultural report that accompanies this application, and that this is the justification for this large barn on the field. In terms of TB risk within animals, England is divided into three areas: high, edge and low. The application site, and indeed Waverley as a whole, sits in the low risk area. A LFU unit that is ultimately badger and cattle proof, and for the rearing or finishing of cattle which go directly to slaughter, the setup of a LFU is such that there is minimal risk from TB to the surrounding cattle herds and wildlife. And in order to achieve this, there are strict biosecurity protocols that must be adhered to. These units can buy cattle from anywhere in the UK, but they must be pre-movement tested. It's been pointed out to us by local farmers that TB testing is not foolproof, and despite requiring pre-testing before moving cattle, there is still a risk of introducing TB into the area and impacting on the business of local farmers. LFU licensing conditions are aimed at ensuring that the LFU remains a discrete, self-contained cattle unit, clearly isolated from cattle herds, other livestock and wildlife. The object is to prevent disease spread within the locality of the unit from undetected infection within the unit. A LFU must be wildlife proof, which means that the sides of the building must not be open. Yet, in this proposal, the barn has an open side on its entire 64-metre eastern elevation. The boundaries of an LFU must be effective and secure. There should be separate housing, management, equipment, machinery, yards, etc., and a double fence with a 3-metre gap or something that effectively serves the same purpose. Yet, no details of such biosecure fences have been provided with this application. The application has provided insufficient detail on how he will meet the biosecurity issues required by the LFU licensing conditions. And it's this absence of detail which is causing so much concern among the local farming community. And until such details have been provided and evaluated by the planning authority's independent experts, Dunsfold Parish Council believe that this application should not proceed. Going to the officer's report, paragraph 10, principle of development, I quote, the NPPF suggests that permission should be granted for agricultural development if it relates to an existing unit and would not significantly detract from the character of the landscape. The application site is not and never has been an agricultural unit. It's a field originally used for grazing as part of High Locksley Farm, the buildings and barns of which are opposite the entrance. Now under the separate ownership of the applicant, this is simply a field in AGLV designated open countryside with a storage barn on it. And this proposal will significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape, including the views from Hascombe Hill. Paragraph 11 in the officer report, agricultural justification, suggests that on the basis the applicant has a financially sound business and established permanent base at Locksley Park Farm, officers consider that the site is part of an existing unit. As has already been explained, the sound business involves 900 acres, including scattered rented land, and not just the 73-acre field and barn at High Locksley, where there is no base. It's just a barn in the middle of a field. This proposal would involve the expansion of the current holding by introducing an alien and potentially hazardous operation, which the farming community believe has the potential to cause untold damage to the farming community locally. And finally, we believe that any highways impact assessment is premature in light of the outstanding UCOG application, which if granted permission would mean that the same single track road would also be used for well construction and service HGVs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Well, members, I'd just like Zach to give us clarity on what is planning and what is not planning in this application. Bear with me, please.
I think there's been a lot said about TB and potential impact on local wildlife. Whilst, you know, I'm no expert in this area, there is a licensing regime for that. If they're applying for a licensed unit, they will need to meet those licensing requirements to get that license. That's not a matter for you as the planning authority to consider. If they don't meet those licensing requirements, then presumably they won't get a license granted by DEFRA or whoever grants those licenses. So I just wanted to be clear on that, you know, we shouldn't be looking at what we're ostensibly looking at is the planning impacts of this development, not the health and safety of local wildlife. The only other point I would make is there was comment made about the transport impacts and the transport assessment that was submitted with the application. I should point out that this application has been considered by Surrey County Council as the local highways authority, and they've raised no concerns. I would also say that whilst I do understand where Dunsfold Parish Council are coming from, and there's a lot of concern about Locksley Well and the application there, we have to consider the application that's before us, and we can't make any assumptions about what the Secretary of State is going to do with that application, which has now been called in by them. And I think you'll have to judge this application on its own merits. And as I say, the view from the Surrey Highways Authority, who are they are the experts in this area, is that there is not a material highway harm. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, and I promise I won't get into a Locksley Well appeal at all. So firstly, if I can just have a question of clarity. So we've got the officer's report, and the title of the planning and agricultural statement refers to a cattle finishing unit. But in the planning and agricultural statement, paragraph 2.1, it calls it a licensed finishing unit, which are two very, very different things. So I wonder if we can have absolute clarity what is being asked.
Tracy, would you clarify that for Councillor Dinas, please?
Yes, Chairman. I think that follows on from what Zach's just said. I've assessed this as a finishing unit. I believe that DEFRA will be the governing body to issue a licence for that particular use. So I've assessed it very much on the development of the building.
Thanks, Tracy. Councillor Dinas, is that clear?
Well, not really, because obviously there's very different criteria on what should be considered. And if it's the licensed finishing unit, then there'll be other issues such as the biosecurity, storage, which I think we should be considering. So I do think we should know exactly what we are dealing with, because they are two different criteria and two different things.
Okay, I want us to be clear on that too. Zach, please.
Well, it's a cattle finishing unit that's designed to, ostensibly designed to be able to be licensed, but it will only be licensed if it meets the requirements of DEFRA. I think what we're faced with, we know what the building is, we know where it is, we know where it's sited, we know its size, we know its design. Other issues around whether or not it should be granted a license, again, fall outside of our plan, our role as the planning authority. It will be a matter for DEFRA to decide whether or not it meets the criteria to be granted a license. I'm assuming there are all sorts of applications that need to go to DEFRA, and they'll consider that.
Thanks, Zach. I have Councillor Townsend and
Sorry,
Councillor Follows.
That was my question. Can I now put my views across? Sorry.
Councillor Dinas, I beg your pardon. Please proceed.
It was a good way of trying to keep me quiet. Obviously, we'll move on from that, but I have concerns that we're not considering what the implications are. One of the things you did say, though, was about the size. Well, being old-fashioned, I looked at what meters mean in feet and inches. This is 3 inches short of 210 feet in length. It is 26.5 feet high, and it's just under 79 foot wide. That is huge. That's more like an aircraft hangar than anything else. That is massive. Going to the officer's report. So looking at the planning constraints, so we're in countryside beyond the Greenbelt. It's outside the defined settlement area. It's an area of great landscape value. It's within 500 metres of an ancient woodland buffer, and it's near listed buildings. So we've got 5 planning constraints that we can consider. The document also goes through a number of policies. And I'll just quickly go through some of those policies to highlight where there could be some breaches. SP1, sustainable development, and it talks about having developments that improve economic, social, environmental conditions in the area. Well, when you read the report, it's obviously a new business, but there's the threat of potential damage to an existing business, which is a wedding venue close by. So I'm not sure what the economic is on that. Social, environmental, I'm not really sure what the benefits are under that policy. TD1, I mean, I've said the size of the building. Is this an outstanding design or create a safe and attractive environment? Well, we won't go down that road, but I think there's a concern there. Policy NE1, which is about conserving and enhancing biodiversity within Waverley, and this is about retain, protecting, and enhancing features of biodiversity. I'm not so sure how it does that. Policy RE1, which is about the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, will be recognised and safeguarded. Well, I don't know how we can say that with the size of that building plopped into a GVLV. Retain policy D1, which is regard to environmental implications of development. And it's about promote and encourage enhancement of the environment. Don't think it does that at all. Loss or damage to landscape value, I'd say yes. Harm to visual character and distinctiveness of the locality. You'll be able to see it from the hills. And it says under that policy, in particular respect to design and scale of the development and its relationship to the surroundings. So we're suddenly going to have a 210-foot shed plopped into a field. Part D talks about traffic which is incompatible with local highways. I'll leave it as that. And part E of that policy is about potential pollution of land or water, including the storage and use of hazardous substances. And one of the reasons I want to know exactly which license, because they do have implications, and therefore it could be a policy consideration. Policy D4, part A is about to be appropriate to the site in terms of its scale, height and appearance. And policy RD10, which was mentioned earlier, proposals related to and located on the existing unit, I emphasise the word existing unit, and is reasonably necessary for agricultural, horticulture or forestry. So I'm not sure this is existing because this is a new business. And part B, it says it would not significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape. When we look at WA 2020-1186, which was the mobile home that we discussed 2 months ago, the reason for refusal was it would fail to safeguard intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and ANOB. Justification put forward does not outweigh the harm, which is policy RE1, RE3 and RD10. So that was saying it wouldn't safeguard the character and beauty with a mobile home, which may be 30 foot long, and we're talking about a 200-foot building. Page 57 of the officer's report after refusal says, the test is whether the current proposal is acceptable in its own right. I'd say no to that. That was an easy one. And this site is a grazing field. It's part of a farm unit. So this unit is a finishing unit for cattle, which are kept inside until they're sent for slaughter. I'm not sure, because it depends on which of the licenses, whether the land will be used for grazing or whether it's going to be self-contained. So we don't actually know that because we're not sure exactly what type of license. Page 58 is about the agriculture justification. And I was quite disappointed because it uses some of the applicant's consultants' views. Now, what I was disappointed, when you look on the website, there's a 7-page document which was submitted by the gentleman who was objected on his behalf. And that is not mentioned in the officer's report. There are huge number of issues and concerns that have been raised, and these have not even been addressed in the officer's report. And the first question, you know, the second paragraph, I think, is it says it's for a cattle finishing unit, but everything in the document says it's for a licensed finishing unit. You know, there's no clarity. I'm disappointed that 2 or 3 lines from the applicant's consultants has been used, but none from the 7 pages of concerns have even been mentioned. So I think that's really, really disappointing. You know, we like to see balanced reports, and there's not even a mention of that report in existence. And you only find it when you look at the gentleman's name rather than it's a consultant's report. I'm sure, hopefully people have gone through that report. I won't go, there are countless questions. It really would be tomorrow, because I am unsure, as there's no answer to those questions. I'll leave it as that, because I'm sure there'll be other comments to be made, but I would like to come back at the end if there's any other further points. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, no problem with that. I have Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor Follows, and then Councillor Egan, and Councillor Darcy, you're number 5. So, Councillor Townsend, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I'm not convinced by any argument that this is adding on to an existing unit. At the moment, there's just a storage barn there. It isn't part of a farm complex. I'm a bit concerned about on-site supervision as well, seeing as there's no provision for anyone living there or anything, and yet there's going to be hundreds of cattle, seemingly with no nobody nearby potentially to be looking in on them. It isn't a farm, it is a grazing field, and I think we have to bear that in mind. The other thing I'm a bit concerned about is that as well as the size and the impact, the red line boundary on the page 65 of the report is quite small. There is no provision there, it seems, for where manure is going to be kept, bedding is going to be kept. Where's all the slurry going to be stored from this particular, you know, they're saying that it's a finishing unit, so therefore these will be necessary. Is that they're going to be lighting? Is the lighting going to be on in the night? The impact on the landscape there will be really significant. Are there going to be HGV movements at night? What time are the HGV movements going to be? This is a countryside area on a country lane. I'm not sure. It may have been in the transport assessment. I don't remember seeing it. This is obviously going to be one of the largest units in the area other than the aircraft hangars. I'm also concerned that the EA haven't been consulted, because slurry is a big thing from these sites. There is a watercourse not that far away, and I'm concerned that there's been no consultation, it appears, with the Environment Agency on this. So I think potentially the impact on High Billingshurst, the wedding venue, could be significant. But again, there's nothing being done about the odour and what the potential odour might be from this particular site as well. The runoff on the building, it's a massive unit. Where is all that water runoff going off of the roof of that building? Nothing. We don't know where it's going at all. That has to be a consideration as well. That should be something. You can't just have a massive building and then have the, you know, where is that water going to go? How is it going to be dealt with? There's a footpath nearby, and it's not marked on the plans. I don't know whether there'll be any impact on footpath 280. I think that this particular unit is not in the right place. It isn't in the right area. I don't think there's adequate provision for the rest of the requirements that is required, as in all the storage for this particular, for the red line boundary. All they've done is put a massive big building with no other requirements for how it's going to operate in that site. And I can't see how that can be used on this site at all. So I think there's far too many questions for me. And I just don't think it's in the right place. This was bought as a grazing field. It is a grazing field. Now it's being turned into a development area for all intents and purposes. And in the absence of any answers to my questions, you know, I can't support this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It sounds like with all of these questions that speakers are putting forward, that deferral may be an issue here. Councillor Follows, and then Councillor Hegan.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting you mentioned that very point, because that a lot of the questions I had were similar to Councillor Townsend, and I think possibly I might need to declare another non-pecuniary interest in that I believe I was protesting at the applicant's land at the weekend as well, relating to another matter, and I just probably want to put that on the record. If Kim, you would take that as an additional declaration of interest. This is, for me, probably the first one of these sorts of agricultural type planning application I've ever sat through, and obviously there are a number of biosecurity concerns which are clearly not planning matters in this case, and we're not a competent authority to judge on them. So I mean, I think from that point of view, we have to disregard all of those. But a number of other aspects, such as effluent pollution in general and various other aspects regarding the building. I think probably the one question I think I can ask officers that is probably answerable, and I'm assuming the answer is yes, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here looking at this at all, is that a building like this for agricultural use on clearly open field, that's considered a continuation of agricultural land use, even though it's fundamentally different. Is that the case here?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested. I mean, I really don't want to sound flippant, but this is agricultural land and this is an agricultural use. Some councillors have said, well, it's the wrong location, but where else do you put an agricultural building other than in the countryside? You know, that was my main question. The other questions about the size, effluent, all of those things are relevant. But in terms of the principle, it's agricultural land.
Yeah. And that answers my question just in terms of how the planning rules treat this. I mean, I don't necessarily agree, because I think actually it is a very different type of use. But then you go back to, well, if you were looking 100 years ago, would you give planning permission to half the things that are around farms by that logic? So I can see where I actually would like to take this, and I don't want to preempt other members from speaking, but I honestly do think that we do not have sufficient information to make a judgment on this. Half a dozen of the things Councillor Townsend has raised are so serious that if I didn't have that information, I don't believe I can come to a judgment on this. And I mean, I obviously wouldn't want to stop other members from speaking, but I'd be very keen to motion for a deferral to seek some of the answers to the questions that we've got. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have Councillor Hegan, Councillor Darcy and Councillor Cossa. But just picking up on what Councillor Follows has said about the potential for deferment, perhaps future speakers can consider that as well. Thank you. Councillor Hegan.
Can you put your microphone on, please?
I'm terribly sorry. I was just on a point of order asking the chairman if it seems to me a procedural motion is being proposed and we ought to hear it now rather than waste a lot of time on further debate. If that motion's passed, then we can debate. I'm not going to support it, but that's neither here nor there. Let's have the motion and move on.
My concern was that a motion might not pass at this point because people haven't spoken yet. But to be quite honest, in terms of the time of day that we're at 20 to 10, I personally would believe it very unlikely that we deal with most of the important aspects. So I am going to motion for a deferral to seek answers to the questions regarding pollution and certainly pollution, effluent, the size and scale of the building, and half a dozen other questions that have been asked by Councillor Townsend, and I'm sure the committee can put those questions to the chair. I don't know if I have a seconder. I'm putting it out to the open here.
Well, I think you do have a seconder, and Councillor Hegan, I'm sure, was rapid in there. So members, I think certainly at this time, and with the amount of concern that we want to put onto this application, Councillor Follows has moved deferment for this application. May I see those in favour of deferment? Councillor Wilson.
I think we should defer it until we have an idea of the support infrastructure for this building.
Councillor Goodridge?
Yes, I'm in favour of deferring it, but another question to be asked is I'm not sure how you get all the cattle in and out on a lorry when the site is, there's no turning circle for a lorry to get in and out. So far as the application site is, the edged in red is concerned, which comes to the same point that Councillor Townsend mentioned.
Yeah, I think as they say, there are more questions than answers. So those in favour of deferment, please show. And those against? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 13 for, none against and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Well, members, may I echo your thanks to the officers tonight for a normal sterling work that they do. How can it be improved? Thank you very much. Members, safe journey, and